Lab partner mocks me for being short, so I brought a measuring tape to set the record straight. Now he's embarrassed and denying everything. Original post. I am a 5'1" female and my lab partner constantly makes fun of me for being short. For example, I came back from the bathroom and he said, "I thought you fell in the toilet because you're so tiny." He also said that my hair is so big it makes my head and me look even more tiny. I am not insecure about my height, nor does making fun of it offend me, but it's annoying and ironic because he's short too, looks 5'6". And yes, I know it might be because he's interested in me, but I don't find him attractive, so the teasing isn't cute, it's just very annoying. Last lab I had enough of it and basically told him to shut up because he's like 5'5". He said he's not 5'5" and he's 5'9". I know I am very short, but he is definitely not over 5'7". We started arguing about it, so I told him I'll bring a measuring tape next class and we'll find out the truth. I started to feel a bit bad after because I know men are very insecure about their height. However, him obviously lying about his height and constantly making fun of me makes me in the mood to be petty. Will bringing the measuring tape make me an asshole? Edit. I accidentally put F22 in my title, for my lab partner. To correct myself, I am female 20 and my lab partner that makes fun of me is male 22. More explanation as to what he says. Editor's note, fix the title of the Boru for clarity. Some of OOP's comments. Commenter. NTA, he's finally found someone shorter than him and it makes him feel superior. If he can't take it, he shouldn't dish it out. OP, do you think me bringing the measuring tape will make me the asshole? Commenter. NTA. Bring in the measuring tape and a big, black Sharpie. Don't say a word to him. Go to the door frame and mark 4, 5s and 6. Between the 5 and 6 foot marks, place the inches. Remember how parents used to measure kids' heights against the wall for the door frame and leave marks for little Susie is so tall on October 31st and Ben is so tall on the same date. Don't say another word to him, just leave the measuring marks so he has to look at them every day as he passes by the chart. Keep direct eye contact with him whenever he walks by it. OP. I'm rolling with laughter. Thank you for this idea. I'm definitely going to do this. I was planning on just measuring him, but the marks on the wall would be more accurate. I don't know if I would be allowed to draw on the wall with a Sharpie though. I may do it with a washable marker instead. Commenter. NTA, he shouldn't dish it if he can't take it, but I don't know that it'd help to escalate with the tape if you'll still need to work with him. Can you switch partners? OOP, no, I can't switch my partner. This is my assigned partner for the rest of the semester. Thankfully I only have 3 classes left. Commenter, downvoted. He's definitely trying to flirt with you, IMO. He wants to emphasize how small you are because it makes him feel bigger and he's probably not used to that, LOL. He wants to make it clear that compared to him you're just cute and small. He's obviously insecure about his own height. I do think being short has wildly different implications for men and women, but it's not like you decided to do this after he made an offhand comment. You're clearly annoyed by this and he's being disruptive and kind of desperate by not shutting the fuck up about it. Measuring tape might be the exact tool you need to show him why this kind of shit is very bad for him, LOL. OP. I think so too, which is why I was hesitant to say anything. I didn't want to make him more insecure. I don't think he means it in a harmful way, but it's just annoying because he mentions it every single lab. However, last class he kept making inappropriate comments about our other lab partner and I getting married and having babies. That really crossed the line for me. I gave him a death stare and told him to stop in all seriousness, because the comments he was making were just making things awkward and uncomfortable. He chose not to listen and keep going thinking he was funny. After that I lost all respect for him. Commenter, haha. I had a guy worked with once who insisted he was 5'8". I literally said we're the exact same height, and I'm 5'3". Dude had the audacity to say someone had lied to me because I was obviously 5'7" or so. NTA, don't let their fragile masculinity bother you. Measure that boy. OEUP, this is absolutely hilarious. This guy said the same thing, that I must be 5'5". So now I'm suddenly not short anymore, huh, El Mayo? The audacity of these men to lie by a whole 4 inches thinking people won't notice is just embarrassing. OOP adds a bit more from his bullying. I'll tell you what I told the other person who said the same thing. To clarify, he also said, I thought you fell in the toilet because you're so tiny, when I got back because it took a while. He also said my hair is so big it makes my head and me look even more tiny. To add on, he repeatedly calls me shorty, or brings up my race saying my people are usually short. When I try to ignore him, he just keeps repeating the same thing to annoy me and get a reaction. I love being short. So there's nothing to be sensitive about. It's him being annoying and making these comments to someone he barely knows, all the while he's also very short, that bothers me. Oh, and I'm bringing the tape. Update. Same post. Update. I got to class late because of traffic, so I didn't have time to tape it up. Also, there is no actual wall beside me, so nowhere I could really tape it. But I still measured him. I whipped my tape measure out and they started laughing at first because everyone knew what was about to go down. Before I measured him, he asked me what the margin of error was and said, "That thing is 2-3 inches off." We both knew he lied at this point, lol. But I insisted on measuring him, and at first he didn't want to get measured. I told him to take his shoes off and he said he didn't want to. I said I'm subtracting an inch from the measurement then. He was 5'7" with the shoes on, so without them he's actually a little less. Even after I clearly measured him, he kept denying it, saying it's wrong, that I measured him wrong and the tape measure is incorrect. He then looked up how tall is 67 inches, because he kept saying that must not be 5'7". I couldn't believe he kept denying it even though I clearly just measured him. His friend, in the lab group across from us, is about the same height as him and also lied about his height last time. So he was embarrassed too because they both were obviously lying. I made a joke about how the top 2 inches must be invisible and he wasn't too happy. Our lab TA 6'2" came over and asked what the measuring tape was for. I told him it was to measure his height, pointing to my lab partner. I said he lied and the TA started laughing too. Next week I'm thinking of just taping the measuring tape at the door before class so they're always reminded of it when they walk in. There's really nothing more I can do. We both know he lied even if he doesn't admit it. Editor's note. Marked as concluded. Since OOP hasn't updated and proved her point, everyone knows the kid was lying. My boyfriend is upset that I'd consider breaking my vegetarianism for a week-long trip to Japan. How should I navigate this? Original post. My boyfriend is upset that I'd consider breaking my vegetarianism during a week-long trip to Japan. I, 34F, have been vegetarian for about 4 years. My boyfriend, 34M, is a meat lover. He is an excellent cook and he loves steak and other types of meat. He's never asked me to start eating meat. I have never asked him to stop eating meat. I don't care what he eats, it's 100% his, and everyone else's choice. I don't talk about being vegetarian, don't promote it, and I try to figure out my own food if I need to so I don't inconvenience others. Sometimes it's hard to find a restaurant with a vegetarian choice besides a side salad, so I'll do the legwork to find a restaurant everyone will like. My choice to be vegetarian hasn't seemed to be an issue or cause any big inconvenience, but maybe I'm wrong. When I went on vacation with my boyfriend's family for a week, his mom revised her risotto recipe to use veggie broth instead of chicken broth so I could eat it. I didn't ask. I think my boyfriend suggested it to her. I was really appreciative. When my boyfriend and I went on vacation for a week, we both looked up restaurants that would have a veg option for me. We mostly ate at seafood places because of where we were vacationing, and I managed to find a veggie burger or something like that at most places. My take. I have a work trip to Japan coming up soon. I told my boyfriend I was considering eating meat during that week so I can fully experience the culture and food. That means sushi, wagyu, ramen, things like that. I'm not sure if I can actually get myself to eat meat during the trip because I think I'll feel guilty about it. My choice to be veg is because I feel bad for how animals are raised, treated, farmed, and the nature of how they're usually killed. I know I can get humanely raised meat, but I choose to abstain altogether. I miss sushi and steak the most, but again, I abstain. My boyfriend's take. He is upset that I would consider breaking vegetarianism for this week-long trip, but I wouldn't consider breaking vegetarianism to have a steak with him. It makes him feel like he's not worth it. It makes him feel like the trip and the co-workers I'm going on the trip with are more important than him. I know he bonds over sharing food with people. He likes to cook for other people, and he's never been able to cook a steak for me, and we've never been able to share a steak dinner together. We've gone to steakhouses before, but I just eat whatever else they have. It's not the same as us both enjoying a steak. He also said that all the effort to accommodate me being vegetarian seems like a waste now. His mom going out of her way to make the risotto without chicken broth, looking up restaurants where I can eat something besides a salad, him cooking stir-fry or other dishes and leaving the meat separate on the flat-top grill until I serve myself the veggies, and then after that, he combines it all together with the meat, things like that, me not being able to enjoy the best shrimp he's ever had on our vacation together. He was to the point of tears over us not being able to eat a steak together. I understand it would make him feel bad that I'd consider eating meat on the trip, but I haven't offered to eat a steak with him. I feel terrible for making him feel this way and making him feel less important or less worthy. I apologized for this and apologized for making him feel this way. I told him that's not it, it's not that he's not worthy, that this trip is probably once in a lifetime, and I'm afraid that if I have a steak here at home with him, I'm concerned it'll become a slippery slope. I told him I don't want to stop being vegetarian. How do I navigate this? Editing to add, when he told me how he felt about this, I listened, apologized for making him feel so poorly, and validated him. I understand why he feels bad, and I should have thought about how this might go before I said it, that I'm considering eating meat on the trip, out loud. During the conversation, I thanked him for telling me how he was feeling and thanked him for telling me how important that would be to him. So I offered to have a steak with him, and I also let him know I don't want it to become a regular thing because I prefer to stay vegetarian, or mostly vegetarian I guess, since having steak with him wouldn't be vegetarian. I know sharing meals together is important to him. It's also important to me. What I did not know, however, is that he was so badly wanting to have a steak together where I eat it too. When he cooks meat, I always comment on how good it looks and smells, and he has said before, "I wish you could taste this." In hindsight, that comment from him was probably hinting at him wishing I'd offer to eat a steak with him. He hasn't asked me, "Hey, can you please eat a steak with me tonight?" Or "Would you ever consider eating meat with me or for me?" If he asked me those questions and I said no, and then I said I'm considering eating meat in Japan, that would be a different conversation. I haven't rejected him that way, but I also haven't offered to eat steak with him either until this conversation came up. I didn't know this specific thing was something he wanted so badly. I thought because he eats meat as much as he wants and we eat many meals together that he was satisfied in this area. We've never been to a vegetarian restaurant together. I try to make my vegetarianism as small as possible. I don't want it to be a thing. I bring food to his house. I get a side salad or kids' grilled cheese at restaurants that don't have any other veg options. I don't make it a big deal. I completely understand why he feels bad. That's not what this post is about. I'm just wondering how to best move forward. I also just told him I was considering eating meat on that trip without thinking about it first. I didn't think about how he'd feel slighted. I didn't think about how I'd feel. I'd feel guilty and anxious about the thought of actually going through with eating meat, etc. When we talked about it, I brought up that I'll have to slowly incorporate meat into my diet leading up to us having a steak together or to going to Japan if I choose to eat meat on that trip. I know that's a thing. Considering how anxious I feel about actually thinking more about going through with eating meat, I think it's best for me to just not eat meat on the trip. But now I still have to figure out how to address the topic with my boyfriend because now I know he wants me to eat steak with him, and I offered to do that for him. Thanks for all the feedback, everyone. Update. Here's what happened. This is going to be really long. During the 2 weeks leading up to me leaving for Japan, we got into a couple big arguments, and about 5 days before I left he told me he can't do it anymore. He can't take all the arguing, he's exhausted, I don't take responsibility for the things I'm doing wrong, and all I do is focus on what he's doing wrong. I don't talk enough about the things that I need to fix about myself. I don't talk about my insecurities enough, and I don't take enough responsibility for the ways I communicate poorly and how that makes us fight. A little more context about the arguments. Argument 1. We had a talk one Sunday about how I was feeling. He could tell I was down, and I told him I was feeling lonely. He asked how else I'd been feeling lately and I shared that I've also been conflicted about some work stuff and some family and friend stuff. We didn't talk about loneliness, just about the other things. He went into solution mode and was emotionless about it. It wasn't what I needed, but I went through that process with him first since he seemed determined to get to the bottom of it. Throughout the discussion, a couple things rubbed me the wrong way. First, he told me he doesn't think I actually feel that way. And second, there was no empathy. When he was done leading that discussion, he asked me how I felt. I told him poorly. The first thing I shared is that it's disheartening when he asks me how I feel. I tell him how I feel, and then he replies with, "I don't think you feel that way." This isn't the first time this happened. Other times when he's asked me how I feel or what I think about something, he's told me, "I don't believe you. I don't think you feel that way. It doesn't make sense to feel that way. I think you feel like that because of XYZ, not because of the reason I gave him." The second thing I shared is that I would have liked him to not only focus on analyzing the situation and to say something empathetic like, "Ah babe, that sucks you feel so lonely. I'm sorry to hear that. What's going on?" I told him I appreciated the solution mode discussion and that helped, and I also needed some empathy. He got quiet and his body language changed. I asked him if he's upset. He firmly replied, "Yeah, I'm upset." I asked why and he said because I'm only focusing on the things he did wrong. He tried so hard to handle the situation well and he did everything else right, but all I told him is what he did wrong. I reminded him he did other things right. And I referenced back to other conversations where he has shared a grievance with me and I haven't given him what he wanted at the moment. He wanted more empathy or more softness, for example, and he's quick to point it out and tell me what I'm not doing right and what he needs from me. This conversation kind of ended after that. I brought it up again a week or so later and he said sorry for not handling it well. Argument 2. He told me he was making plans to watch a horror movie with his friend, Aaron. They periodically watch movies together, just the two of them, and that's fine by me. However, this made me feel insecure this time because I don't feel like he gets excited to make plans with me, really tries to make or initiate plans with me, besides just hanging out at home or something or saying we should go to the brunch place we like nearly every weekend. Anyway, I got really quiet and started tearing up in the moment, and I was trying to process how I felt and figure out if it's worth bringing up or if I just need to handle it on my own and not tell him how I was feeling, because I know it's an insecurity of mine. He asked me what's wrong and I decided this is benign enough to talk about. I told him this made me feel really insecure. He told me it doesn't make sense for me to feel that way. I shouldn't feel that way, and he's never done anything to make me feel that way. I explained myself and explained why. He loves horror movies and I want him to want to share that with me and I feel insecure about it. If the rest of our relationship was healthy, this probably would not have made me feel poorly. But I had been feeling not really wanted for a while, so this kind of tipped the scale. He persisted that it doesn't make sense for me to feel this way and listed reasons why I shouldn't feel that way. Eventually he said okay and he understood what I was saying. He asked me if I felt heard and I said yeah, I think so. Then he wanted a chance to say his perspective. He went right into how it doesn't make sense for me to feel that way, why I shouldn't feel that way, and that he's never done anything to make me feel that way. I got so frustrated because that contradicted what I thought we just resolved when he said he understood my feelings. He got upset because I was bothered about it again after I just told him I felt heard. He said he wanted softness from me and I wasn't receiving him well. We went back and forth after that, me trying to explain why his responses to me were bothering me, and him insisting the same things again. It never got resolved. Argument 3. I was leaving for Japan on a Friday night. My flight was at like 7 p.m. That same day he was going to drive about an hour away to spend the weekend with his best friend. We talked a few weeks prior and I said I wasn't going to work that day so I could prepare for the trip, and we agreed we'd hang out that day but never firmed up any plans or times. We went out to dinner and I asked him what time he was planning to leave on Friday to drive to his friend's house. It was a genuine question with no feelings or anything attached. He replied between 3 and 5 p.m. I don't know what I was expecting him to say, but when he told me 3:05, I realized I felt bad because I wanted him to want to spend that time with me leading up to my flight, and maybe take me to the airport or something. I never expressed this to him previously. We didn't talk about it yet. But in that moment, I told him I felt unconsidered and I wished he would have considered me. I screwed up because I should have told him I wanted to hang out leading up to my flight instead of saying I felt unconsidered. But at the same time, I don't know if I would have felt comfortable telling him that because it would interfere with his friend time and change his plans. I'm not sure how he would have received that. Maybe well, maybe not. He got really upset. I tried explaining why I felt unconsidered, and immediately his body language changed. He pushed himself back in his chair a little, made this smirk, scoffed, and started interrupting me. I got frustrated and heated and told him not to interrupt me when I was trying to explain my feelings, and I can see he's about to get defensive. I was definitely triggered by his change in demeanor and his attempt to interrupt me. I thought to myself, not again? Not this time. Stand up for yourself and make sure you get to share your feelings. He got even more upset that I assumed he was going to get defensive, and he got upset I wouldn't let him interrupt me. He said he did consider me. His plan to leave between 3 and 5 wasn't firm, and if I just let him interrupt me, this big fight wouldn't have happened. He said my feelings weren't appropriate because they were based on an incorrect assumption I made. The assumption I made was that he didn't consider me, and that his plans to leave between 3 and 5 were firm. He told me he just pulled that time frame out of the air and it wasn't firm. He didn't have dinner plans with his friend yet, so it was all flexible. When he explained himself, I thanked him for explaining it. I apologized for assuming he didn't consider me, and I told him I see his perspective. He was really upset with me though. So he explained again why what I did wasn't okay. It wasn't okay that, 1, I assumed he didn't consider me, 2, I said, I wish you would have considered me, 3, I called out his body language, and 4, I assumed he was going to get defensive. Side note, me saying I wish you would to him is a no-no because it makes him feel awful, so I have worked hard to not use that phrase with him. I failed this time. I explained that those were my feelings based on the information I had at the time, and even though they were based on wrong information, it's still okay for me to tell him how I feel first, and then he can set the record straight. Then he can say something like, oh, these plans aren't actually firm. Sorry you didn't feel considered. The plans are flexible. And I can say, okay, sorry for assuming that. I'd like to hang out until I go to the airport. That didn't work for him. He insisted that if I just let him interrupt me, none of this would have happened. I ended up reiterating his point and apologizing 3 times. Also, over the summer, something similar happened with the roles reversed. He assumed something incorrect and he was upset about it, and I interrupted him to tell him what the correct information was, and he told me I need to hear him out first before I chime in with the correct information, because his feelings are still his feelings and they should be heard. It's hard to do, but I agreed. So I brought up that conversation as justification for why I should be allowed to tell him how I feel before he interrupts me. He still wanted to interrupt me because my assumption was wrong. Then he got upset that I changed my stance so quickly. When he told me the plans were flexible, I apologized for assuming he didn't consider me, and I told him, okay, I understand, that works for me. He said he feels crazy when this happens. When I feel bad about something, he explains his side, and then I say okay, I understand, and I let my original feelings go and I side with him. He said that I'm gaslighting him because it seems like a big deal to me, then he gets worked up and then I back down. I tried to explain that it's normal and healthy for someone to be told new information and then take that information into consideration, and change their approach. It's healthy for me to hear him out and say, yeah, I made an assumption and I shouldn't feel bad about this anymore. Anyway, he was really upset with me all night. The whole fight was because of my poor communication. When we woke up the next morning, I thought he was going to apologize to me. Apparently, he thought I was going to apologize to him. That's when he told me it's over. TLDR, he broke up with me. I'm back from the Japan work trip. I didn't eat meat or seafood on the trip. I did have some soups made with fish broth since that was tough to avoid and that made me feel sick, but overall it went very well. I'm struggling now with the breakup. Am I the asshole for kicking out my dad after he said he couldn't afford to feed me anymore? Original post, throwaway. Here's the backstory. 28M, I got my own house now. Moved out at 18, not really by choice, my dad basically pushed me out. Our relationship's been rocky since then. He's always been a huge drinker and smoker, which caused plenty of issues back then. Fast forward, he lost his house a couple of months ago, and didn't keep up with loan payments. So he calls me up, says he needs a place to stay while he gets back on his feet. I laid out a few ground rules. Either pay rent, $400, or cover groceries, about $250-300, and absolutely no smoking in the house. He laughs, says I'm your father, I shouldn't have to pay. But I don't budge, so he reluctantly agrees to buy groceries. From the moment he moves in, it's just one problem after another. Leaves a mess everywhere, doesn't clean up, smokes inside even though I made it clear that's a no-go, and drinks like there's no tomorrow. Then one day, I have a girl over. And he just has this meltdown over it. So I tell him, listen, if he can't respect my space, he'll have to find somewhere else to stay. Things settle for a bit, but last week, he hit me with I don't have the money to buy groceries this month. I'm like, why? He says, well, you eat a lot. And admits he spent all his cash on smokes and drinks. That was it for me. I was done with him acting like he owned the place, done with the flashbacks to dealing with him as a teen. I told him to pack up and leave. So, AITA? I set clear boundaries, he didn't follow through. Edit. I never thought my post would garner so many reactions. I'm glad I'm not TA, and thank you all for your support. I'd like to clear out a few things. No, we didn't have a formal contract when he moved in. It was oral-based. Kicking him out won't be easy, as police don't tend to offer much support to a son in relation to the father. The societal response is that a son should take care of his old parents. This was one of the reasons I agreed to take him in. Like if I could do something good for him, maybe he'd change his view about me. The feeling of being validated by my own dad after years of neglect was strong. NGGL. I see now how foolish it was to take him in. How would I get him out if he refuses to leave? He would go out to buy his supplies, I'd change locks the moment he leaves, and go out too. If he breaks anything, then it's cop time. AITA has no consensus bot. OOP was NTA relevant comments. Commenter 1, NTA, his I shouldn't have to pay showed his respect for you before he even moved in. Give him a month's notice maybe, but that is as far as your charity should go. OOP, I gave him until the first week of November. The only things he actually needs to pack are his drinks and smokes. He had stored almost everything from his house in storage. Commenter 2, NTA, kick him out. Apparently, losing his own house wasn't consequence enough for him to realize that he needs to change some things in his life. So, as he disrespected your reasonable rules, he needs to feel the consequences by losing the place he could stay again. And in case he gets family and friends involved, what inevitably will happen, you can tell everybody who says you should let him stay, that they are welcome to open their home for your dad and offer him to stay with them. OP. I'm already painted black in front of most family members. I don't know what they're going to tell me which they haven't already said earlier. LOL. Commenter 3. NTA. I'm guessing at some point he's used the phrase, my house, my rules, and that's a sword that cuts both ways. OP. He did. He most definitely did. Update. He moved out today. Sorry to disappoint y'all, but the process was surprisingly peaceful. The day of the last post, my dad told me he needed to talk. I braced myself. What he said was totally unexpected and welcome for me. He said that he couldn't bear the disrespect I've shown him, and he was never going to contact me again. His words, you failed me as a son. I told him if he needed help in the future he could contact me, but he must abide by some conditions. He scoffed and said he was leaving soon and didn't talk to me again. He left today. As I said earlier in the first post, he had little to pack, and had most of his possessions in storage. He didn't tell me where he was going and didn't bid adieu. No, I was comfortable with it. A toxic part of my life was being erased. I'm feeling a different kind of freedom, which I haven't felt even after I left home. Where he goes now is none of my concern, although I would have liked to at least know where he's going. Oh well, this is the update. Maybe a bit disappointing for this sub, but I personally am very relieved how this played out. Thank you all for the advice and all the responses, this meant a lot. Back to lurking with my main account. Peace. Top comments. Commenter 1, we can only be thankful when the trash takes itself out. Grats on your newfound peace. Commenter 2, change the locks and monitor your credit history for a while. Better to be safe than sorry. Congrats, and I hope you make the list of your independence. Commenter 3. Actually, I'm glad that it was a peaceful exit. I'm even more glad of how you stood up for yourself and didn't fall for the okie doke he tried to hit you with. You did a lot of growing to refuse to fit back into the box of being a child in regards to dealing with him. You're an adult, and if he has a problem accepting and respecting that, then leaving was what he needed to do, and it's good that he did. Bravo. Editor's note, marking this as concluded since OOP's father has moved out of the house and OOP also deleted the throwaway account. My mom constantly warns my daughter will become obese, but she's actually underweight, and it's wearing me down. Original post. So like it says in the title, I have a daughter, Leah, who is 5. She's strong and healthy, but slightly underweight for her height. She's been this way since she was a toddler. She seems to take after her dad, who is also very tall and thin. Leah eats plenty of healthy food and gets lots of activity, and we see her pediatrician regularly. He has told us that her weight is not an issue as long as she continues to eat well. The problem is my mother, who is convinced my daughter is going to become obese. While I serve healthy food most of the time, I do occasionally let my daughter have McDonald's for lunch or ice cream after dinner. Every time I do this when my mother is around, she makes dire comments about how Leah is going to get fat. If Leah mentions she had a hot dog for dinner, my mom says something about the childhood obesity epidemic. If she sees me giving Leah a cookie, she shakes her head and says something about how Leah seems to be packing on the pounds. To her credit, she never says these things in front of Leah, but around me she never stops. The thing is, I am overweight and have been since I was a kid. Not obese, but definitely heavier than I should be. Although there are a lot of reasons for this and I know that the responsibility for my health is ultimately mine alone, I think my mother's unhealthy attitudes toward food have played a large part in my weight problems. She would tell me I was disgusting and needed to lose weight, then turn around and give me a cupcake if I had a bad day at school. Food was the enemy, but also my main source of consolation. This led to me becoming an emotional eater, a problem I still struggle with today. I have gone to therapy and made major changes in my lifestyle to become a good role model for my daughter, and I am losing my excess weight. I talk regularly with Leah about nutrition and exercise, but I refuse to place the same value judgments on food and weight that my mother did. I have told my mother, repeatedly, that Leah is healthy and happy and is not in danger of becoming obese, and that I want her to stop making comments, but she can't seem to help herself. I have warned her that if she starts making them in front of Leah that I will cut her off in a heartbeat, but Leah loves her grandma and I would hate to end their relationship over something that is really only bothering me. Can anyone think of a way to get my mom to lay off? Update. Okay, you've all convinced me that I need to put my foot down with my mom and tell her that her comments need to stop entirely or she won't see me and Leah anymore. I'm supposed to see her tomorrow, so I'll post an update after. Thanks Reddit. I really needed to be smacked in the face with reality, And you did it in an admirably gentle way. TL.dr. My mom constantly tells me my perfectly healthy daughter is going to become obese. I'm sick of hearing it but don't know how to get her to stop. Pariah Bear 790. Maybe a trial run where your daughter does not see your mother for an extended period of time, 2 weeks or something. In the meantime, tell your mother how you feel and let that sink in for her. Right now it's concerning comments made to you. Eventually it will be private conversations between Leah and her grandmother. OOP, that is my main concern. I have told her point blank that if I ever hear her mentioning Leah's weight or eating habits to Leah, I will not hesitate to cut off contact. I will not have my daughter raised with the same eating issues I had. I do think she will respect this, because she loves Leah, only grandchild, and knows I am serious about this. OOP when asked if there's any truth to the mother's comments. It's a fair question, but yes, I'm sure there isn't any truth to the comments. Leah's doctor was the one who characterized her as a little underweight. At her last checkup she was in the 95th percentile for height but down around the 40th percentile for weight. If a kid with those stats is considered overweight, I'd hate to see a kid they consider to be at a healthy weight. Update. Thanks for all the responses you gave me on my first post. I think I needed a dose of reality, and that's what I got. After reading all the comments I realized I needed to talk to my mom. So when she came over, before she had a chance to say anything about Leah's eating habits, I took her aside and said, "Enough. Leah is healthy and happy, and your weight comments are inappropriate. They stress me out and they're bad for Leah. If you keep making them, we're just not going to see you anymore." She sputtered a bit, but ultimately agreed to my terms. I was hopeful that maybe she would actually stop making the comments so we could have a somewhat normal relationship and she could continue to see Leah. Ha ha ha. I work a part-time schedule of 2 days per week and every other weekend. This was my working weekend, so my husband was home with Leah. When I got home after work on Sunday, I could tell something was up. Leah was already in bed and my husband looked really tense. He's usually a pretty laid-back guy, so this was weird. When I asked what was up, he said we needed to talk about my mother. I had told him that I had spoken with her and that she had been warned not to make any more comments about Leah's weight. Well, apparently she just couldn't do it, because she called him, knowing I was at work, that day and told him that I was blind to Leah's problem and that he needed to get involved because I had confided in her that Leah's pediatrician told me she was at serious risk of obesity and type 2 diabetes and that we needed to change her diet so she would lose weight. What? For the record, Leah's pediatrician has never said anything like that. In fact, as I mentioned in my last post, he has told me that she is underweight. Fortunately, my husband A attends all Leah's doctor appointments and B has the sense to realize that a rail-thin child isn't edging toward obesity, so he knew it was bunk. He told my mom that she wasn't to call again until she heard from me. Well, I was livid. It was like after years and years of weight-related crap from my mom something finally snapped. I called her and the minute she said hello I just lit into her. I told her that based on her behavior she was either delusional or a manipulative sociopath, and that either way she wasn't allowed around me or my kid again. I told her she was not welcome to call, email, come over or send cards. Basically, we were going to pretend like she didn't exist. I hung up before she had a chance to get a word in edgewise. She called 15 times that night. I finally blocked her number on my cell and my husband's. We don't have a landline so this means she can't call us at all. I had 3 emails in my inbox the next morning, which I deleted without reading before blocking her email address as well. Finally, we had given her a key to our house for emergency purposes so first thing yesterday I had the locks changed then took Leah out for the day. Lo and behold, when we came home my neighbor said that my mom, she recognizes her because she used to come over a lot, had been banging on the door for almost half an hour earlier that day before storming off in a huff. I can only imagine how angry she was when she realized her key didn't work anymore. I feel better than I have in years, which makes me think I did the right thing. The only thing I'm still struggling with is how to break the news to Leah. She really does love Grandma. My husband and I are going to sit down with her tonight, so I guess I have until then to figure out what to say. TL.dr. Confronted Mom, who was even crazier than I expected. Relevant comments, Happy Duck Potato. It sure didn't take long for her to not only not make comments, but to escalate it to OP's husband with lies that are easily shot down. She must be really delusional, which will most likely mean she won't back down to the no contact easily. OP, this is what concerns me. If she has any grip on reality at all, she would realize that my husband wouldn't believe her lies. Either she's actually lost it or she's playing some kind of game by saying that to him. Happy Duck Potato. I'm curious, what is her own relationship with food? Is she overweight? OOP, she's not, but she definitely doesn't have a good relationship with food. She counts every calorie and tries a lot of fad diets to keep her weight down. Her attitude, which I think she got from her own mom, is almost like weight is a moral issue. Being overweight isn't just unhealthy, it means you're a bad person. My husband knocked out my brother for insulting me, and now my parents are forcing me to choose between them. What should I do? Sorry for the throwaway account. I have colleagues on my main account and I want to keep this as private as possible but also need advice. As my title says basically. This past weekend me and my husband were over at my parents' house for a BBQ. The day was going great until my brother for some reason started to have a go at me. Calling me names and belittling me. My husband pulled my brother aside and had a talk with him and the insults stopped. An hour or so later we were standing around talking with some friends and family members and my brother came up to me and told me I'm a whore. His exact words were, "You know you are a fucking whore, right?" He said it loud enough for almost everyone at the party to hear. All I saw was my husband next to me look at me, then I felt a push to the side, my husband stepping in front of me and the next thing was my brother out cold on the ground with blood on his face. All I heard is my mother yelling and my husband saying, "You don't talk to my wife like that. I warned you already." Before I continue, my husband didn't hurt me. He didn't push me hard or anything like that. Don't know how to describe it, but it was like a push that someone will give you when they are trying to pass. I went like one step back, that is all. I am not mad at my husband. I'm mad at my brother. The whole day he was demeaning me, insulting me, belittling me. I don't know where this came from as he has never talked to me like that or to anyone that I know of. The bigger problem is that I have to choose. Either my husband or my parents. My parents are pissed and have given me an ultimatum. I either leave my husband and divorce him or they cut me off completely. My husband doesn't give a crap that they are mad, the only thing he is mad about is that he only got one punch in his words. I love my husband and don't want to lose him, but I also don't want to lose my parents. They have supported me through a lot and have always been there for me. I know they are serious as this is the first time they have ever issued me with an ultimatum. They also threatened my husband with an assault charge, but he didn't care and welcomed them to do it. I'm stuck between a decision that will change my life forever and I'm panicking. I have received messages for friends and other family members that have given me support and condemned my husband, but they are leaning more on the support side. Any advice will be appreciated? Edit: to clarify, I am choosing my husband. I have never questioned that, but I also don't want to lose my family. I am very family oriented and family to me is everything. I want to find a solution where I can keep both. Update. First, I would like to thank everyone and I want to apologize as well for the way I worded my post. It's no excuse, but my emotional state isn't the best. Unable to link my previous post, just look at the account. My husband is my choice and I have no intentions of leaving him at all. Never have. I know it's early for an update, but I'm more confused now about what is going on. My parents invited me over to have a talk with them, but they wanted me to come alone as they didn't want my husband at their house. My husband refused to let me go alone and said if he isn't going then he won't allow me to. He basically said with you alone there they will just pile on you and that I won't let happen, so we went together. My parents weren't happy to see him and my mother wanted to say something until my husband told her he isn't there for them but me and if he is forced to leave I will leave with him. I agreed with him. Reluctantly they agreed. My brother was there as well. He has a broken nose and chipped teeth and refused to look at me or my husband. He just kept looking at the ground even while talking. Apparently what happened with my brother is that he broke up with his girlfriend a month ago. It's more like she broke up with him. Don't know the reason. Don't care. I wasn't aware of this as we aren't close like that. According to him, the reason he had a go at me this weekend is because of my life. According to him, my perfect life with my husband kept popping up on his feeds and he got jealous. Everything on my social media is with my husband. I don't really use it for anything else, but his feed was full of my posts and that set him off as I had something that he didn't. It got worse when he overheard me and my mother talking when I had a discussion with her over children. Me and my husband are currently trying to have a baby and that just made everything worse in his head. His life was falling apart and mine was going perfectly and I was trying to have what he wanted with his ex. He said he didn't take my husband seriously when he pulled him aside and my husband warned him. I seriously don't know why he went after me as nothing he said was true in any sense and I did ask him why he said those things. He refused to answer me. I asked him why the whore comment because he knows my husband was my first in everything and it has only been him all these years. He refused to answer. I asked him if trying to have a baby with my husband makes me a whore as it involves sex and he just left the room. I asked my parents why they didn't step in and tell my brother to leave or stop. My dad said he wanted to, but my mother told him to leave my brother as he is not actually hurting anyone. The same with the ultimatum. They wanted to protect my brother. I asked what about me and they were silent. All my father said was the ultimatum was my mother's idea and he went along with it. This is basically where we are at the moment. A lot more was said but I don't think it matters. My husband did apologize to my parents for what happened but refused to apologize to my brother. When my mother asked him to apologize to my brother he outright said no. He won't apologize for standing up for me and my brother got what he deserved. He was warned and didn't listen. My mother said it still doesn't excuse him for hitting my brother. My husband asked my dad what he would do if someone called his wife a whore. My father said I will have a talk with that person, but will never hit someone. My husband laughed and told my dad he is a weak-willed, spineless man if he allows someone to demean his wife like that. That got my mom red in the face. I could see her get angry. That is when I told my husband it's time to leave. I told my parents that I will be going low contact with them and the ultimatum they gave me broke the trust I had in them. I understand they wanted to protect my brother but in doing that they hurt me. This seemed to take all the anger out of my mother. They asked if I will be cutting them out completely and I told them that is up to them. I don't want anything to do with my brother at the moment as he can't even apologize for what he said to me. I told them if they can respect my wishes we will see. When we got up to leave my husband went over to my parents and actually still greeted them politely but told my dad it's time to grow a backbone. I don't know what I saw but I think it was a shame on my mother's face because my dad looked at my mother and she looked away from him. This is where we are at the moment. My husband on the way back home apologized for possibly escalating things but told me it was time someone told my dad the truth. He said whatever punishment comes he will take and deal with any fallout. I don't need to worry or stress about anything. Wife left me and came back with a baby, begging for a second chance. Am I the asshole for shutting the door in her face? You've heard the phrase, I never saw it coming, repeatedly? For me, it was precisely that way. I was married to my wife for the entire 4 years that we were together. To be honest, I thought we were doing well. For the most part, I believed that we were in agreement and we had plans and a life plan laid out. The problem is that, at least in my opinion, we both desired children. As soon as we were married we began to discuss it seriously. She would constantly talk about how she wanted 2 or 3 children, what we would name them, how we would furnish the nursery, and other details. She would even plan this life with our future children while browsing baby gear and clothing online. It kept us connected and was sort of our thing to talk about. Everything appeared ideal, and we were eager to begin this new chapter in our lives together. However, we received some terrible news that left me speechless. We visited a doctor to find out what was wrong after a few months of trying to conceive. To cut a long tale short, it was me. The doctor essentially informed us that our chances of naturally becoming parents were very limited because my count was much too low. It felt like a stomach punch. All those plans we had suddenly disappeared, and I felt worthless. I was really hit hard by the news. I ended up for a while in a fairly awful position. I was a complete disaster at first, but therapy ultimately helped. At first, she seemed to be rather supportive, stating that she would be content with just the 2 of us and that it didn't matter. However, there was something strange about the way she said it right from the start. She seems to have dropped it far too soon. She was talking about having a family 1 minute and then she was claiming that she didn't need children to be happy. Don't get me wrong, I understand that individuals have second thoughts, but her entire demeanor seemed strange to me. She had stopped thinking about baby names and was now completely avoiding any conversation about children. Furthermore, it seemed as though she began to view me in a different light. She would suddenly start making little jabs at me that she had never said before, like how I wasn't taking care of myself or that perhaps I should work out or do more around the house. Indeed, I may have gained a few pounds, but it seemed like she was constantly looking for reasons to accuse me. She would dismiss it when I questioned her about the abrupt shift in attitude. She would claim that I was being unduly sensitive and that I was only dreaming. But I was aware of a problem. It was different with the lady I married, the one who would spend hours sitting with me discussing our future. She wasn't particularly cruel, but there was a certain coldness about her, as if she had already mentally checked out and was merely following the rules. I suppose that as time went on, I began to trust her when she assured me that everything was okay. In order to avoid coming out as needy or insecure, I quit pressing. In any case, after a few years, we were only getting by. We had gotten into a rut where we hardly discussed anything important. We seemed more like housemates than husband and wife. She would always dismiss my attempts to discuss other choices, such as adoption or surrogacy, by stating that she didn't want to consider them. "I'm happy as long as we're together," she would remark, but I never really understood. She seemed more concerned with persuading herself than I was. She suddenly tells me that she wants to go a girls' trip. She had gone on a few excursions with her friends before and I had always encouraged her to do so, so it wasn't strange for her to do so now. She had been talking for a time about wanting to travel to America with her pals, and we lived in Brighton. We had developed this trust over the years, so I didn't give it a second thought. I therefore made sure she had everything she needed, assisted her with packing, and drove her to the airport. I recall her final words before she departed. "Thank you for being so supportive," she added, turning to face me. She sounded so sincere that I dismissed it as her simply expressing gratitude, even though I found it a little strange that she would say that. It's not like I'd done anything really noteworthy. I remained up that night to make sure things went well by calling her when she landed. I kept myself occupied around the house, watching TV, keeping an eye on the time, and waited for her to text me to let me know that she had landed because her flight was expected to take roughly 9 hours. I called her to check in as soon as I noticed her flight had landed. The phone kept ringing, but nobody picked it up. I didn't give it much thought because I assumed she was exhausted and might have gone directly to her hotel and crashed. However, by the time morning arrived, I had still to hear from her. I began to have this nagging concern in the back of my mind. I thought perhaps she was simply busy or her phone was on quiet, so I tried calling again and then texted her a few times. However, I was officially freaking out after a couple more hours of radio silence. In the end, I gave her sister a call to check whether she had heard from her. Nothing. I was really beginning to freak out by this point. I even went so far as to call her friends, who were meant to accompany her on the trip, in the hopes that perhaps her phone had malfunctioned or she just hadn't had time to check in. However, since they weren't traveling with her, they were also perplexed when I contacted them. Back at home they were enjoying coffee while seated 2 streets away. It dawned on me then that she wasn't traveling with pals, wasn't on a girl's trip and hadn't gone anywhere with anyone. She simply vanished. It seemed as though my stomach had fallen through the floor as I sat there with the phone. I was unable to comprehend it. Why would she tell me such a lie? Why wouldn't she notify me before leaving? I attempted to persuade myself that it was an error of some sort, such as perhaps she had missed a flight that connected or that she had been unable to contact due to an emergency. But I knew in my heart that she had this planned. Her stating "thank you for your support" and the entire girls' trip scenario were all components of whatever she had been imagining. I was at a loss for what to do. I couldn't wake up, as if I were living in a nightmare. I didn't marry this woman. I didn't even recognize this person. The coldness, the way she had stopped discussing our future and those small digs about my appearance and health all began to make sense. I simply hadn't noticed, or perhaps I hadn't wanted to see that she had been drifting away for a while. I just sat there looking at my phone that night, hoping for a call, a text or anything else. However, nothing materialized, and I knew in my heart that it wouldn't. I remember lying there and staring at the ceiling when I woke up the following morning, thinking that it was all just a bad dream. But when she saw that her side of the bed was empty, reality set in. In fact, she had gone. She gathered her belongings and disappeared. The assurances I had given myself the previous evening, that perhaps she was late or her phone had died, were no longer valid. She had clearly planned this and wanted to go. I was completely in denial for the first few days. I would keep ringing her phone in the hopes of hearing her voice and perhaps receiving an explanation. I even left messages. I kept leaving them in the hopes that she would understand, even though I was half the time at a loss for words. However, I only received quiet, which strangely made things worse. I felt as like I had been a stranger to her the entire time and had been left to work it out on my own, without any clue as to what went wrong. Her family was initially just as surprised as I was. They hadn't heard from her, and her mother didn't know anything about her plans. In the end, I visited there more times than I could remember in order to speak with her mother and get answers. They must have felt sorry for me. When I couldn't bring myself to cook, her mom would prepare meals for me and occasionally let me stay there. She would sit there while I talked about all the tiny things that didn't make sense, attempting to figure out how my life had suddenly become so complicated. And to be honest, there were times when I was too numb to speak and just sat there in silence. I oscillated between rage, despair, and remorse. I would constantly ask myself what went wrong. Was there a sign I missed? Was I not paying enough attention to her? On certain days, I would review all of our arguments and conversations in an attempt to determine what caused her to leave. I kept thinking about what I could have done better and how I could have preserved our marriage. I realize this seems dramatic, but I was completely fixated on finding the solution, as if it would somehow make everything better. I hardly slept or ate, and my work also began to suffer. People would notice and inquire about my well-being, to which I would just respond that I was occupied with personal matters. Declaring aloud that my wife had abandoned me without saying a word was embarrassing. I eventually told a few close friends, and they tried their best to divert my attention by bringing me out to hang out and encouraging me to move on. However, I would still worry about her even when I was with them, wondering where she was and why I wasn't enough to keep her. The incessant inquiries from strangers, neighbors, relatives, acquaintances, and even former coworkers who had heard I was married, were among the worst aspects. "How's married life treating you?" And "How's your wife?" are the questions they would pose. It was always like pulling off a new scab. I would just smile and tell them that everything was good because I lacked the courage to tell them that she had left, but every time I uttered that lie, it seemed more weighty. The only thing that worked in the end was therapy. Although I had never gone before, I realized I couldn't manage it alone after a few months of hardly functioning. I thus located a therapist and began attending once a week. It was beneficial to speak with a neutral person who was unfamiliar with her, me, or any of our baggage. I would express my rage, betrayal, and the void she had left in my life. I would talk endlessly about the restless evenings and how I would lie awake repeatedly reliving everything. The therapist assisted me in realizing that she chose to leave, and it was her decision, not mine, and that there was no magical moment that would have kept her here. It was a difficult pill to take. I thought for a long time that I was flawed in some manner, which was why she had left me, but gradually I began to view things differently. I chose to overlook her long-standing coldness and distance, assuming that things would improve on their own. I persuaded myself that I could maintain my composure and that our marriage could be saved by my own efforts alone. The realization that it wasn't hurt. As time passed, I began to restore my life in tiny increments. It wasn't until she departed that I realized how much I had lost in our marriage. I had always been the one who tried his hardest to make sure she was content and that our home life was comfortable. However, I had a lot of free time now and was unsure of how to spend it. I therefore began resuming old pastimes that I had forgotten about. I tried cooking new meals, went to the gym, and started reading literature I had been putting off. Eventually, the work also improved. As I began to feel more like myself, I started to put more effort into my work, but at first I was just going through the motions and barely keeping up with my workload. I felt like I still had control over something in my life, which was one of the few things that gave me a sense of accomplishment. Although I had always been skilled at what I did, I now give it my all. The extra hours, the concentration. I got a promotion as a result of it, something I never would have obtained if I had been moping about my problems. Even yet, there were painful days. A picture, an old movie ticket stub, or other small items that brought back memories I tried to ignore would occasionally remind me of her. Looking at them, I would question her actions, whether she ever considered me, and whether she ever felt bad about what she had done. But gradually, those times began to disappear. I was able to let go of those memories a little more quickly and move on a little more easily each time. Additionally, I got back in touch with people I hadn't seen much of since getting married. We resumed our activities, including hiking and hitting the golf range, something I hadn't done in years. Having someone by my side who wasn't involved in the mess and could support me in moving on without pulling me back into the agony was a relief. In hindsight, I saw that I invested far too much of myself in that relationship, in being her spouse. I felt like I had lost a significant portion of who I was when she departed, as if she had taken a piece of me with her. But I was rediscovering who I was, piece by piece. Although it wasn't quick or simple, I was making progress. I was finally able to see someone who wasn't defined by her past actions when I looked in the mirror at the conclusion of that year. I wasn't just the man whose wife had abandoned him. I had rebuilt, I had survived, and I was stronger now. I felt as like I could truly live my life without her shadow looming over me for the first time in years. To be honest, I took pride in that. I believed I had moved on from everything. After all that chaos, life had at last begun to seem normal again. Or as close to normal as it could be. My work was going really well, my friends kept me occupied, and I had my routine down pat. Even my daily thoughts about her had stopped. Even while I still occasionally had flashbacks to odd memories, it wasn't as frequent as it used to be, when she was somehow involved in every part of my existence. She was therefore the last person I expected to see standing there when someone knocked on my door one Saturday morning. But there she was with a baby at my doorway. I went cold. It was like witnessing a ghost, and for a moment my brain simply stopped functioning. Though perhaps a touch worn down, she still had her typical appearance. She looked at me as if she genuinely believed that I would be delighted to see her. And yes, it really got to me because I had assumed I was no longer interested. As it happens, meeting her again evoked many feelings I had previously suppressed. At first, I just stood there and stared without saying anything. She asked, "Can I come in?" With no embarrassment after grinning at me as if nothing had happened. The nerve. Really, she just shows up here as if I should be welcoming her back with open arms after everything she's done. However, I maintained my composure and assured her, No, you can stay there and explain. I didn't want her in my home, bringing all the craziness back into the one area I had created for me. Despite her somewhat disoriented appearance, she remained in her spot and began telling her story. I know this might come as a shock, but I wanted to come back and explain everything, she said. She even had a hopeful expression on her face, as though she really thought I would be willing to listen to her. I was tempted to just close the door and laugh in her face, but I was too intrigued. I was curious about the reason behind her disappearance and what she had come up with. She continued by explaining that she had erred in leaving and that she had come to the realization that she had lost the greatest thing that had ever occurred to her, not my words, but hers. She claimed to have thought a lot and to have finally realized what was important in life after having this child. After years of ignoring me, it seemed that what mattered most was unexpectedly knocking on my door. This is our second chance, she remarked, glancing down at the infant. What I was hearing about our second chance was unbelievable. It sounded like we would just pick up where we left off, with this child acting as some sort of miraculous reset button. I was furious on the inside, but I attempted to maintain a neutral appearance. She continued by claiming she wanted us to be a family once more and that although she had made a horrible mistake, we could now start over as just the three of us. The one question that has been bothering me ever since she arrived was finally asked. What made you go? I tried to speak as steadily as I could, but I wasn't sure how much longer I could contain myself. Now that she was here, I needed to hear it from her since I had tortured myself with all the possibilities for years in an attempt to comprehend. After hesitating and glancing down at her feet as if embarrassed, she finally told me the truth, or at least what I thought it was. She acknowledged that she left because she wanted a child and had found someone who could provide one for her because I couldn't. She honestly stated it as if it were insignificant, as though she hadn't destroyed my life, and as though I should just nod and take it as gospel. She clarified that although the man she had left didn't stay, she had already given birth and knew she wanted me back by that point. As simple as that. Easy. I paused to think about what she was saying. Here she was confessing that she had left me, fled with a man, and had his child, and now expecting me to accept it, as if I would simply forgive and move on. You went, met someone else, and had his baby, and now you think you can return and act as if nothing happened? I asked her. She broke down in tears and apologized for her terrible error. However, I was completely unmoved by that. She kept talking about how she knew we were meant to be together and that I was the person she really loved. To be honest, maintaining a straight face was difficult. She sounded so naive that I was shocked. Her expression was one of desperation, not love, and I could see it. She then attempted to guilt-trip me by talking endlessly about how difficult it had been for her to be a single mother. In fact, she attempted to paint herself as the victim in all of this, acting as though her decisions hadn't brought her to this point. She assured me she was prepared to work things out this time and that she wanted my help. I couldn't stop wondering, who does she think I am? I listened to it all as I stood there, but I had had enough. I told her bluntly, you have to live with the decision you made a long time ago. Here, there is no second chance. She appeared astonished, as if she had never even imagined that I would say no. As if she truly believed she could simply saunter back into my life because it would suit her. She became irate just when I thought she would finally understand and depart. She became angry with me, accusing me of selfishness and demanding that I give her another chance to make amends. She said that she could have taken half of everything and divorced me at that time if she had so desired. She even had the audacity to remark that the house should still belong to her. I felt a feeling of relief as I realized that I was now seeing her for who she truly was, as if her true colors were being revealed in front of me. I didn't raise my voice or quarrel with her. We're done. I simply remarked, glancing at her. You finally have the life you've always desired. I no longer have responsibility for this. I cut off any last statements she might have had by closing the door in her face. I was struck with a peculiar sense of serenity as I stood there and heard her muffled screaming coming from the other side of the door. She might shout, knock, weep, anything. However, I knew I would never allow her to return. The woman I had married and loved was no longer with me. This stranger, who believed she could pick up the pieces whenever it was convenient for her, took her position. Feeling lighter than I have in years, I moved away from the door and took a seat. I believed that was it after I shut the door behind her. I assumed she would understand and simply walk away. Instead though, she began pounding on the door and shouting various things. The nerve seemed unbelievable to me. She had the gall to stand there and insist that I listen to her while I was in the one place that was truly mine, the only place I had been able to recover from the disaster she had left me in. I initially considered ignoring it and letting her scream till she became weary. But then I started to wonder. I was curious to know what kinds of excuses she would offer this time. In order to let her know that I was paying attention, I slightly opened the door, but not enough to let her in. She appeared to be astonished that I hadn't given her the response she desired, as if she had just been slapped across the face. As if we were having a typical argument and not coping with her abandonment, she began a lengthy monologue in which she expressed her willingness to forgive me for closing the door on her and her want to start over. She went on and on about how if we both worked hard we could work things out. I was unable to contain my laughter at that moment. I actually laughed because this woman had more nerve than I had ever seen. When I did that, she appeared enraged, as if I should feel guilty for not paying attention to her. "You left," I informed her. "You tossed everything away while you had the chance. I won't just act as though nothing occurred just because you want to." She began repeating things like, "You don't understand how hard it was for me." As her cheeks flushed, she continued by talking about how she had been so lost after leaving and how she had discovered her error too late. However, I didn't believe it. I informed her that she had taken the decision to leave. She had plotted it, made up a falsehood about it, and then carried it out. Now her remorse meant nothing. She lost her temper at that point. Her entire tone shifted. She stopped the melancholy, repentant act and began to attack me, accusing me of unfairness and lacking the grace to give her another chance. In fact, she dared to declare, "I could have taken everything from you back then if I'd wanted to. I could have stolen half of your possessions." I simply stood in awe. This woman, who had abandoned me without saying anything, now believed she should be compensated in some way for not attempting to defraud me, as if she should be commended for not being as awful as she could have been. I said to her, "What the heck? Should I feel thankful that you simply left me without taking anything with you?" She looked at me with a mixture of fury and another emotion on her face, possibly desperation or remorse, but to be honest, I didn't give a damn by then. I had just finished. That was where all the years I had spent questioning myself, feeling bad, and wondering if I was somehow to blame for her leaving vanished. I felt as though the burden I had been bearing was finally lifted when I saw her for who she truly was. But she wasn't finished. She began to pace my porch while complaining that I would regret not giving her another chance and that I would never find someone like her. In fact, by refusing to take her back, she attempted to make me feel as though I was the one who was missing out. It was strange. As if I should be pleading with her to stay. Here she was, the one who ruined everything we owned. She became more louder and continued to complain about how I had forced her to leave in the first place when she realized I wasn't going to back down. She said that none of this would have occurred if I had been more understanding about the entire kid situation. Her reasoning seemed to indicate that I had failed her as a husband because I couldn't conceive, which somehow excused her from leaving to have a kid with someone else. The mental acrobatics were amazing. To be honest, I was shocked that she was attempting to blame me for her decisions. I bluntly told her, "Look, you could have told me the truth if you really wanted a child. When you were making plans to go, you didn't need to lie to me and act like nothing was wrong." She merely gazed at me as if I had smacked her, with nothing to say in response. However, I prevented her from speaking. I continued by telling her, "You have to live with the decision you made on your own. I have no problem with that." She made one final attempt, returning to her dejected expression, and urged me to consider the boy and how I was being unjust by ignoring him. As if I were the bad guy, she really used the child, who was in her arms, to guilt-trip me. However, I wasn't buying into it. "I don't know that child," I informed her. "I'm not involved with him. You are not mine, and neither is he." That was the end of it. I could see her coming to terms with it at last. She was aware that I would never change my mind and that I would never allow her to return to my life. I could see the rage waning and being replaced by something else, either genuine regret or simply exasperation. However, I didn't care. She had attempted to walk all over me and expected me to smile and give her credit, but now she was simply a stranger. For a few more seconds, she stood there as if she was waiting for me to decide to call her back. I didn't say anything else though. When it finally hit her that I meant every word, I just stood there and watched her expression. I closed the door without giving it another glance. I didn't wait for her to hit me again this time. In my heart I knew that I had already made up my mind and that there was no turning back. I don't know, but I left the door with the impression that I had finally prevailed. It was over, even though she had spent so much time hoping to return and use manipulation to get back into my life. I had freedom. Neither for her nor for us was there going to be another chance. She was now only a memory, one that I had at last relegated to the past. I felt like I could breathe again after all those years of suffering and shame. And what do you know, it was pleasant. I felt a peculiar calmness come over me as soon as I shut the door behind her. I no longer felt sad, furious, or even astonished. It was as though all of the remorse, guilt, and incessant wondering that I had felt for her over the years simply disappeared. I was prepared to move on since I had at last found the closure I didn't realize I needed. This time, it was truly over. Naturally, though, things didn't go as well as I had intended. Her mother texted me a few days later. She apologized, stating she was embarrassed by her daughter's handling of the situation and that she had attempted to reason with her, but clearly it had failed. Her mother was a decent individual. She had been of great assistance to me since her daughter left, and I could see that she was truly distressed by the situation. Although I had nothing against her, I didn't want to be dragged back into that situation. I simply said, "Thanks for checking in," and that was my only response. I wasn't going to waste time justifying my choice, and I wasn't going to offer her mother any more information. She knew it was over because she understood. I learned tidbits over the course of the following few weeks via social media and mutual connections. She had apparently returned to living with her parents, and things weren't going well. The father of the child, the man she had left me for, had nothing to do with it. He had bailed out totally. She was left to figure things out on her own because, apparently, he hadn't committed to the long term. Few individuals were eager to help because she had essentially burned every bridge. Her former friends, who had supported me when she first vanished, didn't feel sorry for her. They weren't eager to get drawn back into her drama because they had all moved on. You can't hold them responsible. Her parents weren't too happy either. They didn't have enough money to sustain her and the child. I was aware of this since her father called me shortly after her mother texted me. Curiosity overcame me and I nearly didn't respond. He mentioned that they were having financial difficulties and implied that perhaps I could be of some assistance. He was courteous but straightforward. He continued talking about the infant and how difficult things were for them, saying, "We know you cared about her once." I listened courteously, but I couldn't help but giggle a little, not aloud but you get the idea, when he began to explain that his daughter only needed a little help to get back on her feet. I politely informed him that his daughter made her own decisions and that I was neither in a position nor in the right frame of mind to assist. Since he didn't pursue it further, I believe he understood the message. Her pals, whom I hadn't spoken to in years, began contacting me the next thing I knew. Some attempted to use the guilt angle, claiming that she was going through a difficult moment and that perhaps I could find it in my heart to give her another chance. She even had the audacity to say that the child needed a father figure and that I shouldn't allow my resentment stand in the way of my efforts to assist him. However, I refused to back down. I refused to allow anyone make me feel guilty for making my own decision at last. I had given that woman all I had after years of feeling inadequate, and she had tossed it all away. Instead of relying on me to save her, she should at least take responsibility for her decisions. The calls and messages gradually decreased in volume before ceasing completely. Everyone seemed to realize at last that I was serious, that I had moved on, and that I would not get ensnared again. That's when the true calm arrived. For the first time in years, my life seemed calm and normal. I had my friends, my job, and my routines. I had rebuilt my life on my own terms, so it wasn't a fancy, glamorous one, but it was mine. The irony is that I once again began to discover joy in the small things, which I had not given much thought to when I was married. I would read novels I had been meaning to read for years, cook my own food and take walks. It felt good to be free, and I understood that I could live my life as I pleased without anyone's approval. I wasn't always concerned about other people's happiness or approval, for once. I felt as though I had gradually regained my life. I occasionally encountered someone who knew us both, and they would inquire, "Hey, what happened with her?" I would shift the topic and respond in a succinct, courteous manner. I simply didn't want to keep going back to a chapter that was so obviously over. It wasn't that I was concealing anything. I had finally mastered the skill of leaving her in the past. When I last heard from her, things weren't going well. She was still jumping between her parents' house and friends' sofas after her welcome, and she was having trouble keeping a job. Every now and then, people I hardly spoke to would message me to say she was approaching everybody who would listen to seek for assistance. A few of them even implied that she hoped I might reconsider and decide to play father to her child after all. However, that was not going to occur. I had invested too much time and effort into regaining my life to ever consider taking that route once more. Simply because things didn't go as planned, I wasn't going to be her safety net or the person who picks up the pieces. Nothing was going to pull me back into that chapter. I was finished. Ultimately, I believe I received the necessary closure. She was now coping with the repercussions of her decisions. And me? It was the first time since the day she departed that I felt completely, truly free. I had had enough of her looming over my life. I was happy that I had moved on. Not in a grand theatrical sense, but quietly, contented. And what do you know? That was sufficient. I sincerely appreciate you staying until the very end. Please remember to like, share and subscribe if you truly enjoy our videos. Enjoy your wonderful day. My parents pressured me to forgive my cheating fiancé, so I exposed my dad's affair, leading my mom to leave him after 30 years. In July, I was to get married. When I returned home from a business trip 2 months ago, I discovered my ex-fiancé having an affair with the sister of my closest friend. I threw him out, called off the wedding, and threatened to throw away his belongings if he didn't show up to pick them all up. A few weeks later, I pawned the ring, sold or donated everything he gave me and placed everything he left on the curb with a free sign. I blocked him everywhere. I called the police on him when he came hammering at my door after I'd taken away his belongings. I contacted them once again after he showed up at my place of employment and made a scene. I also called the police on his family when they gathered in large numbers to argue his case. I didn't go all out for my ex or the sister of my former best buddy. I told her spouse that I had seen her having an affair with my former partner. The last I heard, she had returned to living with her parents after being evicted from the residence. My former best friend made an effort to persuade me to give them both an opportunity to clarify. What? No. She then accused me of being cold-hearted and petty, accusing me of destroying her sister's relationship. Therefore, I also kicked her out. I don't want to be around dishonest people who don't care about betrayal. Without a doubt, this incident festered inside of me until I let go of my parents. Perhaps that's why I was so hard on them when it persisted. I brought a date to supper with my parents last week in the hopes that his presence would prevent them from bringing up my failed engagement. I had been under pressure from my parents to reconcile with my ex. He's really sorry. Give him 5 minutes to explain himself. You owe him that. He didn't care about her. He was wrong. You're being unkind by excluding him in this way. How could you report him to the police? How could you treat his family the same way? His parents deserve no such humiliation. They are decent folks. He's struggling right now. He is depressed. Everyone is concerned for him. You have his undying love. He has come to his senses. It's time to mature and extend forgiveness to him. No, they continued to bring it up despite my date's presence. When my ex jammed his dick into anything that moves, as he does, I lost my temper and asked my father if he expected me to put up with it. I questioned my mother about her experience of ignoring her husband's adultery. How does she maintain her composure when dining with women who have had sexual relations with her husband for years? Does she want my sister and I to have that kind of life and that kind of man? For her daughters? I inquired as to whether they were aware of the influence that knowledge had on my siblings and me as we grew up. Being aware that dad was sabotaging his secretary, which is why he was late coming home from work. Being aware that a work weekend was a code word for a dirty weekend spent with a non-mom. Did they not understand that I am the only one of their 4 children who still communicates with them? Do they not wonder why they were left off of my brother's wedding invitations? Why haven't they met the wives or kids of either of my brothers? Do they believe that my sister is simply being dramatic and having a tantrum because she is silent? Really? In addition to congratulating them on the death of their last surviving kid, I got up from the table and said I hoped their conceit, willful ignorance, and suffering would ease their final moments. I left my date after that. Instead of using him as a FU to my parents, I ought to have saved him for a special evening. He drove me to the closest pub, let me on his shoulder as I got totally wasted and then made sure I made it home without incident. He messaged me the next day to check on me and even delivered over a large Sprite, large fries, and a double cheeseburger via DoorDash. Although I haven't heard from my parents, I didn't block them. I've cooled down enough to feel regret after a week, not because of what I said, but because I can still picture the expressions on their faces when I said my final goodbye. I damaged and devastated them, especially my mom. I adore my parents in spite of their flaws, and they are plenty. I feel a lot of remorse about hurting them and I don't like knowing it. Edit 1. Although I haven't read every remark yet, I believe that some information has to be made clear. My date was aware that we would be dining with my folks. When he invited me out that morning, I told him what I had planned for the evening and asked him if he wanted to go. I was surprised when he said yes. When he did, I told him that I wasn't being serious and that it would likely make him feel a bit uneasy. He simply chuckled and offered to pay bail if necessary. There you have it, he knew there would be drama in that restaurant. Edit 2. I have other folks in my life besides the ones I named in my post. My siblings are with me. They didn't interrupt me. Just a few days after I found out about the adultery, my sister flew in to be with me. I also had amazing friends who helped me move my ex's belongings to the curb, pack up my belongings, and even find me a person who paid a reasonable amount for the engagement ring. I only brought up my ex-best friend, etc. because of their actions and words, which helped all those long suppressed emotions to surface when and how they did. Responses from the OP in the comments. Ex's parents. Being on the outskirts of my parents' social circle, my ex's parents are undoubtedly aware of my father's numerous infidelity scandals. They must have expected me to endure the same level of contempt my mother has shown me over the years. Commenter. You dislike your parents' choices, even though you love them. Considering what you've told us about your early years and their current actions, it makes perfect sense. How can they continue to be a non-toxic part of your life? Consider that. What do you want them to accomplish? What would be the absolute minimum and what would be ideal? OP. Although it would be ideal, my mother will never abandon my father and take him for granted. My father using discretion is another thing that will never occur. Knowing that their needs and wants would always come before everyone else's, do they really care about the humiliation they've inflicted on us? I don't think I should hold my breath for it, but I would be content with an acknowledgement of the hurt we've experienced over the majority of our lives. Commenter. Is it possible that your ex believed there would be no repercussions for him either, given that your mother finds nothing wrong with her partner cheating? OP. I understand why people could believe that. My sister was the only person I discussed it with. When it came up, we were both intoxicated and high. Naturally, people would assume that I was okay with things the way they were. How could they be supposed to know that I wasn't comfortable with it when no one asked? I can appreciate that viewpoint. As of September 29, 2024. I haven't been here for a minute. Work and life have been hectic, so I haven't had time to update Reddit. We apologize to everyone who kept contacting us to request an update. Better late than never, I reason. In summary, when my parents pushed me to forgive and make amends with my unfaithful ex, I became angry with them. At that moment, I told them some really tough and painful facts. Then I felt a great deal of shame. The remorse began to consume me. I want to start by saying thank you to everyone who left a comment on my post. Even though I didn't publish for approval, getting comments from the majority of you did ease the burden a little. I made an effort to read every comment. Even though my timing was poor, I was able to recognize that what I said was extremely vital, even though it didn't remove the guilt I carried. We also appreciate everyone who chose to send private messages instead of posting on the main thread. Speaking with you and reading your personal accounts of comparable upbringings made it clearer to me that my adolescence and childhood had been painful and left scars that I hadn't yet healed. Another shout out goes out to the people who harassed me about my choices, preached about the sanctity of marriage and the idea that men are simple beings with simple wants, and attempted to teach me how to be a woman, lean in, and fulfill my responsibilities by letting a guy indulge in his vices. Not to mention the sweet little chicken nugget, who told me my reaction was evidence that I'm a serial cheater and that my ex should have used a cattle prod on my happy place. I would especially want to thank the men who promised to train me to be obedient and know my place. When your wives went, it must have been difficult for you all. Bravo to those women for joining you and fleeing a life of pain. Now, for the subsequent events. Shortly after my posting, perhaps a few weeks later, my mother left my father. One evening, she brought her bags to my apartment. She looked so broken and pathetic that I cannot describe it. My heart ached for her as I carried her inside and held her. It dawned on me then that she had no one to turn to, no one at all. No friends, no family. I can't help but wonder if Mom had been alone during her entire marriage and whether she would have had the guts to leave my father at that point if one of us had spoken up sooner. My mother is typically very calm and elegant, so I had never seen her look so shattered. I was astonished to see her like that. I forced her to share my bed with me that night because I was so anxious. My siblings all arrived to offer their love and support within days after I phoned them. Before long, my sister, mother and I were all sleeping in my bed. She was glad to see that her kids still cared because we did love her and we cared. My siblings had distanced themselves from the problem. My mother initially stayed with me. She was struggling because she was carrying the burden of years of shame, guilt and humiliation. I didn't want to leave her alone and was concerned about her mental health. I brought her to a shelter and we got her a dog because I couldn't take time off work to spend all of my time with her. I reasoned that if she had something to do, it would divert her attention from her melancholy. She fell in love with a 5-year-old mixed breed, and he fell in love with her again. I had hoped for an active puppy to keep her occupied. He is an idiot. He managed to push his entire head between the spindles on the stairs, and we woke up to his howling one night. To get him out, we had to contact the fire department. My mother, who now calls him her baby, Obviously didn't believe he was at blame. He loves her, and she loves him back. After making some adjustments, my eldest brother relocated her across the nation to live with him and his family. He believed that she would be better off living somewhere she wouldn't have to worry about running into her father or any of his numerous women. It appears to be helping that he was able to find her a therapist. According to all sources, she is an indulgent grandma who loves her role. She sees the grandchildren every day because she has a separate in-law suite. According to my brother, the children are typically located at grandma's when they go missing. My dad, on the other hand, is still my dad. He has plenty of company. He invited me to supper to introduce me to the new woman in his life shortly after my mother moved. Since she had always referred to my mother as her best friend, I reminded them both that I knew exactly who she was. Another awkward dinner is about to happen. My dad made an effort to make it as amiable as possible, but every time she talked to me I would recall an instance from my early years when she was around our family and inquire as to whether or not she was having an affair with my father at the time. He contacted me the following day to express his disappointment in me. It only seemed right that I disclose my own disappointments. He attempted to minimize what he had done over the years and even played the victim of his own acts during our little argument. I ended up barring him and ending the chat abruptly. He arrived at my door a little more than a month ago. He must have been a little alarmed when I refused to let him in. He expressed his desire to keep me around. Whatever you think of him, he is my father, and I love him and don't want to lose him. He assured me that he would not have me engage with any of his women. We have had a few enjoyable and successful adventures thus far, and I'm cautiously optimistic that we can stay in each other's lives. As for me, I'm in treatment because I followed the advice several of you provided me. Realizing that you're not as good as you may believe is a humble moment. Going through all that history and therapy has been nearly intolerable. After certain sessions, my only wish is to go to the closest bar and drink till I lose all memory of what I've just experienced. I'm using therapy to figure out where it all began and why I am who I am. One of the hardest things I've ever done, in my opinion, is therapy. I'm not sure why some of you do it so voluntarily, or how you've done it for as long as you have. It is helping, even though I feel like a crazy nutter, for listening to all of you nutters in the first place. The majority of you have been waiting for this update. The number of messages I've received from folks who want to know more about him is incalculable. You all seem to be saying, "Girl, just tell us about the date. We don't care about whatever crisis you're going through in your life." Since my piece was not about him, I have not responded to any of those questions. In a roundabout manner though, I feel like I owe you all something because you all contributed to our current situation. I will mention a few things, but I won't go into detail about everything that has transpired between us. After watching a podcast on YouTube, he got in touch with me and emailed me a link along with the question, "Is this you?" It would be an understatement to say that I was mortified. I was too embarrassed to respond to him. I didn't even read the messages he sent me over the following few weeks because I was so overcome with embarrassment. A ton of screenshots of people's remarks were there when I eventually got around to reading them. I doubt I need to explain what those comments said to you. After a while, I responded to him. As I previously stated, I have had a hectic personal and professional life, so it was challenging for us to find time to visit one another. He has a life and a job too. I didn't think we could develop a friendship, much less anything more, because we could only get together for coffee a few times. Since then, however, I've discovered that he is as relentless and tenacious as a hound with a bone. He persisted until we managed to schedule another date. After that successful date, there were others. He finally introduced me to his grandparents, who were the two most significant individuals in his life. I currently own a little flock of wooden birds that his grandfather carved. His grandmother feeds me whenever I visit her and typically brings food home with me because she believes I'm too thin. He is friendly with my brother and sister, and he even accompanied me to my mother's birthday celebration, where he got to know them all. He treated her with great grace. I had him stored in my phone as Cheeseburger, for a time. When he objected, stating, "I bought you a double cheeseburger," I began referring to him as Double Cheese, which I ultimately abbreviated to DC. My phone still has him saved as Cheeseburger. I'm not sure how to handle the fact that he is an undercover Swiftie. I don't dislike Taylor Swift, but I didn't think he would like her. I'm okay with his using me as a front for his Swiftie inclinations, just as he did with his younger sister and niece. Reactions from the OP in the comments. Remarker, this was an update now. I hope the best for you. Request a duck to accompany the birds. Haha. I hope you have a happy life. OP. He handed me a goose when I asked for an owl. LOL. Remarker, hearing that you're seeing the cheeseburger makes me very happy. I'm hoping. Commenter. That you're seeing the cheeseburger makes me very happy. I hope that continues to go smoothly. I was expecting some news about the cheating ex, such as the fact that he's homeless and unemployed, lol. Subject: he's not even a blip on my radar. Questioner: why do you even still love your dad? Ash: are you in contact with him? OP: I cherish my father. Just like I love my mother despite her staying, it is possible to love someone and still detest what they do. I will never experience remorse for loving both of my parents. Down the thread. Commenter: in what way do you sidestep the query? Dad: do you love him? Do you adore your mom? OP: the things he subjected us to were abusive, and the things she made us stay through were equally abusive. In any case, I adore them. I will admit that I adore my folks. Sue me. My family sued me to give my house to my golden child brother. Later, they kidnapped my wife, claiming they were saving her from me. I've been harboring this grudge for years, and I'm not sure if I'm seeking guidance or if I simply need to vent. It's difficult to describe, but I suppose I've always known that my family didn't really love me, not in the manner that I should have. My brother, Ryan, is 17 years old and I'm the oldest sister, 24. 7 years is a great enough distance for us to never truly get along. To be honest, I believe that things began to go south as soon as he was born. I could tell as a child that he was the center of my parents' universe. I was just there, and he was their golden child. The more I think back on it, the more I see how messed up everything was. Even if I used to think maybe I was just being dramatic or hallucinating things. For instance, Ryan received a brand new PS5 with everything he could possibly want for Christmas last year. Me, I received socks. Walmart basic white socks, no joke. Even the socks themselves don't matter to me. I could live without them. The thing that bothers me though is that it was the only present I received. As Ryan devoured his presents like a ferocious animal, everyone was gathered around, grinning and laughing. The enthusiasm in the house was all for him. Then there was me, with a little packet of socks in my hand and a phony smile on my face as I was totally disregarded by everyone. What's crazy is that this wasn't an isolated incident. This was how my entire life was. My birthdays? Don't think about it. My family didn't even recognize my birthday until I was about 10 years old. They either forget or stop caring after that. My parents didn't even say happy birthday, so I celebrated my last birthday with college pals. Nothing. No text, no call. For Ryan's birthdays, however, they give it their best. My parents arranged a huge celebration for his 16th birthday last year. They hired a bouncy house, invited all of his friends and relatives, and even hired a magician or other entertainer. They had the entire event catered, and the house was decked out. Like the Super Bowl of birthdays, it was absurd. I wasn't even invited either. Yes, you read correctly. Even my own brother's birthday party did not extend an invitation to me. I only learned about it the day before, and when I brought it up to my parents, they dismissed it, claiming that I was too busy with school to want to attend. To be honest, I tried to forget the entire incident by going out with my friends that day, but even as we spent time together, I couldn't get rid of the feeling that I wasn't welcome in my own family. When my birthday arrived this year, it was the true kicker. Maybe, just maybe, they would at least recognize it, but I didn't anticipate anything. I've learned not to. Nothing. Once more, I spent the day with my college pals. Although it was enjoyable, the tiny celebration they organized for me in the dorms is not the same. Even if it's only a little, your family should enjoy your birthday with you. Every time Ryan turned 10, my parents transformed the house into a ludicrous pirate adventure theme complete with costumes and treasure hunts, reminding me of what I was missing. In the meantime, we enjoyed pizza for my 10th birthday. That was it. And I considered myself fortunate to receive that. The continual reminder that I'm not the favorite, that I never will be, is what hurts the most, not the presents or the parties. I've made a concerted effort to be a good son by doing all they asked of me, staying out of trouble, and getting good grades. However, none of that was important. Ryan has always been charming. He's gregarious, athletic, and everything I'm not. And my folks loved it. I recall being ecstatic to have a younger sibling when he was born. I assumed we would play video games together, be great friends, and hang around like the brothers in movies. However, I quickly discovered that Ryan also had no interest in me. He had all he could possibly want. His friends, his sports. I was merely present. I was the forgotten child, the fallback option. I became resentful of him as we grew older together. At first, I don't think it was his fault, but he began to recognize his authority. In the view of my parents, he could do no wrong. Guess who would be held accountable if we got into a fight? Me. Always me. My parents would simply laugh it off if he made a mistake, or they could even accuse me of not doing enough to assist him. I was always the villain, regardless of what he did. I recall Ryan lying about smashing the TV once. The TV was knocked off its stand as he and his friend were roughhousing. The object was all but broken. Ryan pointed directly at me when my parents got home and said I was the one who had knocked it over. Even if I wasn't at home, you know what? They took him seriously. They confiscated my phone, grounded me for a month, and pretended that I was a criminal. I basically gave up at that moment. In an attempt to escape from home, I began to isolate myself more and spent most of my time in my room or at friends' houses. However, each time I entered the house, it seemed like I was entering a never-ending reminder that I was unimportant. Ryan's room was filled with posters of his favorite sports teams and all the newest technology, whereas mine was tiny and claustrophobic. He seemed to have his own little empire, and I was just a nobody in the background. I will always remember my 18th birthday. I hoped that since I was growing up, they would do something special for me. However, no. It was just another day when I came downstairs that morning. Ryan was playing on his new Xbox, my dad was reading the paper, and my mom was working in the kitchen. No one spoke. Not even a happy birthday card or present. I seemed to be non-existent. I came to the realization that nothing would ever change at that point. Ryan had prevailed. He had stolen everything from me, including my parents' love and care. What's the worst? Most likely, he was unaware that he was doing it. Or perhaps he did, but he didn't give a damn. In any case, it wasn't just the typical sibling rivalry that made me loathe him. I'm referring to *hate*, the kind that keeps you up at night contemplating how much better your life would be without them. I realize it seems drastic, but that's my situation. Anger flares up inside of me every time I see Ryan's face. I no longer find it bearable to be in this family or to be near him. My parents always dismiss my attempts to express my feelings to them, claiming that I'm being theatrical or that I ought to treat Ryan with more consideration. However, why should I? When someone has taken everything from me, why should I be kind to them? I feel as though I'm caught in a never-ending circle of hatred and animosity, and the worst part is that I have no idea how to escape it. All I want is for myself to feel important and valuable. However, I will always be the second best in this family. From here, I have no idea where to go. Perhaps I should break things off with them. Perhaps I should go up to Ryan and tell him how much he has wounded me. Or perhaps I should just continue to separate myself from them and make an effort to live my life without them. I'm not sure. I just know that I can't continue to live this way. No more. My last post was a few years ago, and to be honest, I never imagined that I would return. I believed that the family trouble was behind me forever. However, the nightmare I thought I had escaped has suddenly become worse than I could have ever imagined, since life has a tendency of throwing curveballs. This is a lengthy and convoluted narrative, so buckle up. I took the necessary action after my last post. I cut off contact with my parents. How could I not? I was being tormented by the ongoing disregard and the obvious partiality shown to my younger brother Ryan. I decided to avoid making too much touch. As quickly as possible, I left my parents' house and moved in with a few college pals. To be honest, I felt as though a burden had been removed. Of course though, I still had to earn a living. Since I've always been skilled in graphic design, I began working as a freelancer on Fiverr. Initially, it was only to cover the expenses, but as I gained more customers and established a reputation, it grew into something more. I put in a lot of work, whether it was on the weekends or late at night. I refused to let my achievement be defined by how my family treated me. Then I met her, Megan, and it was incredible. She was intelligent, ambitious, and kind, everything I could have hoped for in a spouse. We clicked right away because she worked as a freelancer managing social media for small businesses. We began working together on projects, supporting one another's professional development. She was the first person, to be honest, who gave me the feeling that I wasn't invisible. She did see me, And since she truly cared about me, she loved me for who I was, not for what I could do for her or out of duty. Our dreams grew as our jobs flourished. After a year or so of dating, we moved in together, and things continued to improve. Our crazy plan was to combine our savings and purchase a home. But we didn't want just any house, we wanted something unique. We searched for months before locating the ideal location, a huge 3-story suburban home. Our combined income allowed us to make it work, even though it was more than we ever imagined we could afford. We were overjoyed. This was something we created together, our dream. 3 days after we completed the transaction, we were formally homeowners. The real nightmare began at that point. My mother called me 3 days after we moved in. I wasn't even willing to pick up at first. Since I moved out, we hadn't spoken much, and the few times we had spoken, it had either been awkward or resulted in a fight. However, I responded for some reason. As if nothing had happened, she chirped, "Hey honey, we're in town and thought we'd stop by to see the new house." I ought to have been more aware. I should have sensed that something wasn't right. I told her they could come over though, even though I should have known better. I reasoned that it would be better to end the visit than to continue avoiding them. My dad, Ryan, and a woman I had never met before arrived at our front door a few hours later. This is where things start to become extremely strange. My younger brother Ryan, the beloved and golden child, wasn't by himself. The female companion? It turns out that was Karen, his fiancée. She was also expecting a child. Yes, you read correctly. Ryan would soon become a father. Nobody had bothered to inform me of my brother's engagement or the impending birth of a child. My first warning sign was that my father began using passive-aggressive language before he had even entered. "Whoa, you bought this house. Surprised you could afford something like this," he replied sarcastically, as if he had been demeaning me all along. However, I dismissed it. I didn't want to get into an argument. Not quite yet. The discomfort increased after they were inside. Megan sensed that something was wrong when my mom tried to strike up a conversation with her. She kept looking at me as if to ask, "What's going on?" At the same time, Karen was pacing the house as if she owned it, while my dad and Ryan were whispering to each other. Then suddenly, my father revealed shocking information. As patronizing as ever, he began, "We've been thinking. It would make sense for Ryan and Karen to move in here since they are starting a family and will need space for the baby." Not quite digesting what he had just said, I just gazed at him. "What? This house is much too large for you and Megan alone," my father went on, utterly disregarding my surprise. "A location like this would be very beneficial for Ryan and Karen as they raise their child. You don't need all this space." What I was hearing was unbelievable. I felt as though my own house was being gaslit. "Are you kidding me?" After giving me a direct look, my dad said something that made my blood boil. "No, we're serious. It's time for you to let your brother have what he needs and move aside. After all, he is establishing his own family and family comes first. You can find a smaller space with Megan. This house will work better for them." I went crazy. All of the years of animosity, disregard, and partiality suddenly surfaced. "Are you for real now? This home belongs to us. This place is in our names. Megan and I purchased it. Ryan knocked someone up, so you can't simply walk in here and declare he should have it." Ryan, appearing smug, tried to add something. "Dude, you don't really need all this room. Come on, we are parents, you are not." I yelled, "That's not the point. The idea is that just because you believe you have a right to something doesn't mean you can just take it. I'm tired of being ignored for you, even though I've done it my entire life." My dad became really combative at that point. In an attempt to frighten me, he stood up and puffed out his chest. "Watch what you say, boy. You should be appreciative that we're asking rather than merely telling you to give up the keys. Whether you like it or not, Ryan will own this house." I became enraged. I'm not sure what got to me, but I lost it. I shoved him back into the wall as I pounced at him. "Please leave my house immediately." I let out a yell. I was unable to stop Megan from yelling at us to stop. Anger that had been bottled up for years was erupting. After my dad pushed me back, we got into a full-on brawl, hurling punches and cursing at one another. Karen stood in the corner, frantically calling her phone while my mom and Ryan screamed. We didn't ultimately stop until the police arrived. I suppose that when things got out of control, Karen had phoned them. They took my dad and I apart, put us in handcuffs, and dragged us to the station. It was unbelievable to me that this was my reality as I sat in the holding cell. I was sitting in jail because my own father had attempted to take my house from my brother. A few hours later, Megan came to my rescue, but the damage was already done. My family was officially irreparably damaged. However, it didn't stop there. It grew worse, oh dear. In his unending brilliance, my father chose to sue me for the house. In fact, he attempted to sue me, saying that Ryan and Karen were more in need of the house than I was and that I ought to give it to them. I was stunned by its blatant insolence. Thus, we appeared in court. I prepared for the battle of my life by hiring a lawyer and gathering all the required paperwork to prove that the house was in my name. The truth is, though, I had something different planned. I wasn't going to overlook the trail that years of emotional and psychological abuse had left behind. I collected information from acquaintances who had witnessed my parents' treatment of me over the years, including emails, texts, and even eyewitness accounts. I took everything to court. In addition to asserting that the house belonged to me, My attorney claimed that I had spent the majority of my youth being neglected and emotionally abused. I had had enough of being the submissive, quiet son. It was time to defend ourselves. Months passed throughout the court case. My dad did everything he could to paint me as the villain. He portrayed himself as a devoted father who only wanted to act in his family's best interests. Ryan and Karen pretended to be the victims, saying that I was being self-centered for keeping the house and that they needed it for their child. However, none of it was successful. I felt as though a burden had been removed from my chest as the final verdict was rendered. In addition to finding in my favor, the judge mandated that my father compensate me for emotional and psychological abuse by awarding me $120,000. It was unbelievable to me. It felt like justice that someone had finally defended me for the first time in my life. I stopped communicating with Ryan and my parents following the court decision. The lies, the manipulation, and the unrelenting favoritism were all too much for me to handle. Having the house to ourselves at last allowed Megan and I to begin rebuilding our lives. However, the wounds caused by everything that transpired will never completely heal. I still find it hard to comprehend how far my parents went to defraud me, even as I write this. Ryan was the golden child, and I was merely an afterthought. But I suppose that's simply the way things have always been. However, it is no longer the case. About 3 years have passed since my previous update, and I wish I could tell that everything has been going well. I believe that everything had finally calmed down after the chaos caused by my dad attempting to take my house. I believed that I had permanently moved on from the family drama. If I've learned anything, it's that no matter how hard I try to keep my distance from my family, they will always want to pull me back into their toxic mess. Before I get into the recent horror, let me just provide some context. Megan and I were married 3 years ago. I can honestly say that it was the best choice I've ever made, and it was one of the happiest days of my life. After the litigation with my dad, I realized that Megan was the only person I could really rely on because she supported me through all the chaos with my family. Only a few of Megan's family members and close friends attended our tiny, private wedding. My brother, parents, and other family members were not invited. I didn't see the point after everything they had done to me, including the abuse, deception, and litigation. I owed them nothing, and I wasn't going to let their toxic conduct to spoil my wedding day. They discovered it, of course. I don't know how, but a few days after the wedding, my mom sent me a lengthy, guilt-tripping email expressing how disappointed they were not invited. I was okay with my dad not bothering to get in touch. However, it was my younger brother, Ryan, who lost it. I suppose I should have anticipated it. My parents had always gone out of their way to satisfy Ryan, who was known as the golden child. He never accepted accountability for anything in his life, and he always placed the blame for his errors on someone else. The financial status of my parents suffered when the court decided in my favor and mandated that my dad pay me $120,000. They weren't in financial distress or anything, but their standard of living had decreased. Being the pampered brat that he is, Ryan was unable to cope. I suppose that was the beginning of the end for him because he didn't get the house he believed he was entitled to and his father had to pay a hefty sum of money. A few months after the court case, his fiancée, Karen, broke up with him. She took the kid and returned to living with her parents, based on rumors I heard. Although I never heard the whole story, I'm positive that Ryan's inability to cope with the strain was the reason. I can help with it. He believed that I was to blame for everything, including my dad's legal defeat, their financial difficulties, and Karen's departure from him. Things took a very bad turn at that point. About a month has passed since my wedding. As we continued to adjust to our new life together, Megan and I were relishing the tranquility that came with finally escaping the toxic hold of my family. I made the decision to take a stroll around the neighborhood one afternoon. Sometimes I like to take a stroll around the peaceful streets and breathe in the fresh air to decompress. At least it should have been a typical day. I spotted Ryan halfway down the block. He was standing on the street corner, looking at me with a look of unadulterated anger in his eyes. Uncertain if I was seeing things, I froze for a moment. I didn't know why he was in my area, and we hadn't spoken in years. "Ryan!" Confused, I called out. "What the hell are you doing here?" He charged at me before I could even comprehend what was happening. He was also not without anything. He was holding an iron rod that looked like it had been torn off a building site. "What the, Ryan?" I yelled, attempting to retreat, but he moved too quickly. With all of his strength, he swung the rod, and before I could react, it struck my side. Instantaneous, the pain shot through my ribs like a flame. Gasping for air, I sat down, but Ryan wasn't finished. He lowered the rod once more, aiming for my legs this time. When it struck my left shin, I heard the horrible snap and fell hard, landing on the sidewalk. You ruined my life." Ryan's voice cracked with rage as he screamed, "You are solely to blame. Everything is ruined because of you, including the fact that Dad went bankrupt and Karen left me." To protect myself, I attempted to stand up, but my body refused to obey. Every nerve in my body felt like it was on fire from the excruciating pain. Ryan raised the iron rod once more as he stood over me, his face contorted in rage. Knowing what was going to happen, I prepared myself, but I was immobile. I had no power at all. My right arm took the following blow, and I felt the force cause my bone to break. Time seemed to slow down. The world around me grew hazy and muffled, like if I were underwater, and my vision went blurry. I lay there waiting for the next strike, wondering if this was how it was going to end, unable to even scream. I'm not sure how long the attack went on, but eventually I heard voices, far away at first, then getting louder. I could hear footsteps running toward me and shouting. I was too far gone to comprehend what was happening when I saw someone take Ryan and pull him away from me. I lost consciousness. I was in the hospital when I woke up. Megan was seated by my bedside, her eyes puffy and red from sobbing, her face pallid. My throat was dry and every muscle in my body ached as I tried to speak. Megan squeezed my hand and said, "You're okay. You'll be all right." However, I wasn't feeling well. My right arm, left leg and ribs were all fractured. I was fortunate to be alive, the doctors stated. Ryan might have murdered me if the spectators hadn't stepped in at the right moment. To stop him, the police had to be called. As I lay bleeding on the sidewalk, Ryan was immediately hauled into custody and placed in handcuffs. The next few days were a haze. As my body gradually started to mend, the painkillers kept me sedated and I was in and out of consciousness. Megan refused to leave my side and remained by my side the whole time. She took care of everything, including hiring a lawyer to handle the impending court case, handling the insurance, and handling the police reports. Because a trial was indeed imminent. Ryan was facing severe jail time due to the severity of my injuries after being charged with assault with a deadly weapon. Megan gave me the specifics when I was at last clear enough to comprehend what was going on. Since Karen had left him, Ryan had gone absolutely insane. He fell into a severe despair, yet he blamed me for his shortcomings rather than owning up to his own shortcomings. The police report states that Ryan admitted to them that he had been plotting the attack for hours while waiting outside my residence. He brought the iron rod he had stolen from a building site close to his flat. The worst part though, he had absolutely no regrets about it. He told the police that I had destroyed his life, that he deserved to punish me and that he was only receiving justice for my actions. He genuinely thought that I was to blame for everything, including our dad's financial difficulties and his fiance's departure. I was in the hospital for weeks to heal from the fractures. Physical rehabilitation, innumerable testing, and the impending court case were all new forms of agony every day. I was unable to walk for about a month, and even after I was released from the hospital, I spent weeks on crutches and wearing a cast on my arm. According to the physicians, I might not fully recover my left leg's mobility for months, and even then, it might never return. A few months later, the trial got underway. Naturally, Ryan entered a not guilty plea. He believed that I was the one who drove him over the line, and that his actions were justifiable. His attorney attempted to claim that he was in the wrong frame of mind due to all that had transpired with our family and that he had acted out of emotional anguish. However, the proof was incriminating. Several others who saw Ryan assaulting me were eyewitnesses, and they stepped in and contacted the police. The police report unequivocally demonstrated that Ryan had premeditated the attack, and the prosecution had medical papers outlining my injuries. There was no doubt that he had come to my house with the intention of hurting me. One of the most difficult things I have ever had to do is sit in that courtroom and watch my brother attempt to defend what he did to me. Throughout the trial, he didn't even glance at me. It seemed as though he no longer recognized me. The worst part though, it was my parents, not me, who came to support him. They nodded as if they agreed with every word he said while they sat on his side of the courtroom and listened to him spew lies about how I had ruined his life. It felt like being stabbed in the stomach. They still selected him despite everything they had done to me and everything he had done to me. They continued to think that he was the victim in this whole situation. The decision was obvious from the beginning of the trial, which lasted for a few weeks. Ryan received a 5-year prison sentence after being convicted guilty of aggravated assault. After 3, he will be eligible for parole, but to be honest, I don't give a damn anymore. I've come to terms with the idea that I no longer have a family. Not a biological one anyhow. Throughout everything, Megan has been my pillar of support. She is the one person who has supported me through difficult times without faltering. Moving on and achieving both physical and mental healing have been our main priorities. I've been attending therapy in an attempt to handle the trauma of what transpired, but it's taking a while. I feel like I'm finally making progress on certain days, although other days are better than others. On other days, I feel like a shattered, empty replica of the person I used to be, and I can't even look in the mirror. I will never allow my family to harm me again, though. I'm finished with them altogether. Thank you for reading if you have gotten this far. For now, I'm just attempting to live each day as it comes, without knowing what the future will bring. Although there will never be a perfect life, at least I now know who I can trust, and that is more valuable than any family could ever be. My parents perpetrated the most outrageous prank yet, right when I thought I had heard the last of them. About 6 months had passed since Ryan's sentencing. At last, things were beginning to return to normal for Megan and me. We were even discussing creating a family of our own, the nightmares had subsided, and I was improving in therapy. Until last week, things were gradually improving. I was to have lunch with Megan at a cafe close to her workplace. We did it frequently as a way to spend time together and break up the workday. However, she failed to appear that day. I waited at first, thinking perhaps she was simply running late. I called her phone and texted her, but to no avail. My heart began to race. Even if she's only saying she's stopped in traffic, Megan always responds and is never late. A feeling of icy fear crept over me, as if something terrible had happened. When I called her office, they informed me that she had left on schedule. Panic struck. I started driving around the neighborhood since I had no idea what to do and thought maybe she had been in an accident or her phone had died. I received a call from a blocked number at that point. I initially believed it to be a hoax, but I felt compelled to respond. The next thing I heard chilled my blood, therefore I'm glad I did. My mother's voice, which was simultaneously chilly and sickly sweet, said over the phone, "Your wife is with us. We're taking her to a safe place where you can't harm her anymore." My heart stopped beating. "What the?" I yelled, nearly causing the car to crash. "What on earth are you discussing? Where is Megan? What did you do?" My dad's voice interrupted. "She's with us now. You have twisted her against her family and poisoned her mind. We're acting in her best interests. We're bringing her away from you to a place where she can think rationally." What I was hearing was unbelievable. My wife had been abducted by my own parents. In their perverted story, they honestly thought I was a villain, and now they were stealing Megan, my true love, in the hopes of rescuing her from me. I told them, "I swear to God, I'm calling the police if you don't bring her back right now." I'm not sure how I was able to remain composed. My father genuinely chuckled. "Do you believe that we fear the police? You are not her family. We are. She would prefer not to have you around." Never in my life had I been so blindly angry. I quickly contacted the police after hanging up. I was going crazy while I waited for them to track down the call. I kept thinking about what they were doing to her and where they may take her. It seemed like an eternity as the hours went by. At long last the police called me. Megan had been located. She had been brought to a dilapidated motel on the outskirts of town by my parents. They were trying to deprogram her by keeping her isolated in a room and telling her to leave me and return to the family. Being the fierce woman that she is, Megan had already escaped the room and fled to the lobby of the motel, where she pleaded with the clerk to call the police. She was safe when the police arrived, and my parents were immediately taken into custody. They face many charges, including wrongful imprisonment and kidnapping. I genuinely don't care what will happen to them now, but I don't know. Personally, I don't think they're alive. It doesn't matter what false beliefs they may have had or what excuse they may have given themselves for their behavior. I will never forgive them for attempting to take away the one person who is extremely important to me. The only thing that matters is that Megan is safe now. However, I will always remember my mother's voice when she stated that they were acting for her own good. They seemed to be living in another reality where I was the antagonist and they were the heroes. I have no idea what the future will bring, but I know that I will never again be with them. It's time to at last, genuinely move on. After my family took over my house and tried to push me out of my own room, I kicked them all out. I am a 26-year-old who lives with my parents in a home that I fully pay for. Although it sounds rather simple, it's much more intricate than that. I'll begin at the beginning. Last year, I purchased a home in the city. I pay for everything, including food, all of the bills, and the entire mortgage. Not a single penny is paid by my parents, Liz, 55F, and Tom, 55M, who are both retired teachers. Nor was it a case of moving back home because I couldn't afford rent. As a software developer, I actually earn a nice living, and I wanted to be nearer to employment options in the city. In addition, I felt that after they had supported me for years, it would be good to return the favor. It's a pleasant 3-bedroom home with a large living room and a backyard. It's nothing fancy but comfortable. I claim the master bedroom because I pay for everything. It has its own bathroom and a walk-in closet, which is a big plus because I detest having to share a bathroom. Since I spend around 80% of my time working from home, I set up my home office in the second bedroom with 2 monitors, a comfortable chair and all the supplies I need. For family visits, the third bedroom was kept as a guest room. Everything was wonderful at first. While I worked and took care of the house, my parents, who were glad to be in the city, went about their own business. Since they were my parents and I felt good about supporting them after everything they had done for me, I didn't mind paying the bills. Then, however, a change occurred. My mother casually dropped a bombshell during breakfast one morning. My older brother Jake, 28M, and his wife Emma, 26F, were considering relocating to the city, she said. They have reportedly been having difficulties and Emma is pregnant. They really need the help, she added. At first I didn't give it much thought. I thought that if Jake and Emma relocated, they would find a tiny apartment close by, but they have a history of jumping from one horrible circumstance to another. Things took a turn for which I was unprepared at that point. A few days later, my mother sat me down and, in her most innocent voice, informed me that Jake and Emma had been invited to remain with us, albeit only temporarily, until they were able to get back on their feet. They didn't ask if I was comfortable with this though. Oh no, they informed me after inviting them. Jake and Emma arrived with their luggage in hand, obviously intending to remain for the duration, while I was still processing the entire situation. The deal is this. As soon as Jake and Emma moved in, it was obvious they had no intention of leaving. I'm already anxious about the additional costs I'll have to pay. Now that I have 2 more people to support without anyone asking how I feel, I'm paying for everything, groceries, utilities, the mortgage, etc. Although I like my brother, Jake isn't the most responsible person. He always gets himself in a predicament where everyone else has to save him. Emma seems decent enough, but I don't like her entitled attitude, which makes me feel like everyone should take care of her because she's expecting. Almost instantly, the tension began to rise. Emma began making these innocuous-sounding remarks a few days after they moved home, but they are really bothersome. For example, "This place is so big, it must be hard for you to clean it all by yourself." Or, "When the baby stuff arrives, we're going to need a lot of space." At first, I didn't give it much thought. However, things became more heated one evening. Emma and Jake drew me away and said they needed a conversation. I hoped they would give financial assistance or perhaps apologize for the additional strain they were placing on me. However, no. "So we've been thinking it would make more sense if we took the master bedroom," explains Emma in a relaxed tone. Jake interrupted. "Yeah, the baby's going to need a lot of stuff, and your room has the walk-in closet and private bathroom." And I blinked, thinking I could have misheard. Let me remind you, these 2 were sitting here recommending that I give up my own room for them and their unborn child, even though I pay the mortgage and everything else. I was suddenly struck with boldness. I said, "Why don't you just take the guest room?" While maintaining my composure. "It's quite large." Emma looked at me as if I had just made a ridiculous suggestion. "There isn't a walk-in closet in that room," she stated. "The infant will require room." I was finished. I refused to give up my room. "You can either locate another place to stay or use the guest room." Jake was somewhat taken aback. As if he was surprised that I wasn't simply giving in. However, Emma was blatantly insulted. I realized then that things weren't going to work out. Things quickly started to go south. I observed Jake and Emma become quite at ease over the course of the following few days. Their belongings were all over the place, with baby magazines strewn on the dining table and shoes kicked off by the couch. Emma even began discussing the crib's location as if she had already made up her mind that they would remain in the master bedroom. I had to attend a meeting in the office one day. For the remainder of the night, the house was strangely quiet. Nobody tried to quarrel with me or knock on my door. They must have realized at last that I was no longer playing around. They didn't deserve to reside in my home if they didn't respect me. That night, I slept better than I had in weeks. First update. I was hoping for a dramatic outburst, or for everyone to finally take me seriously once I handed out the eviction papers. Rather, there was an uncomfortable silence in the home. Due in part to my inability to fall asleep, I woke up earlier than usual the following morning. I was waiting for a certain event. Perhaps my parents would try to persuade me, or Jake might knock on my door and insist that I change my decision. However, none of that took place. The house was deserted when I woke up and entered the kitchen. No parents, no Emma, and no Jake. I even wondered, wishful thinking I suppose, if they packed up and departed in the middle of the night. I waited for someone to say something, anything at all, while I sat at the table and made my coffee. I had no desire to engage in small talk or repeat my explanation. I wasn't going to back down now that I'd drawn my line. I couldn't continue living that way. They had pushed me too far. They showed me no respect, and they certainly showed no respect for the fact that I was footing the bill. My mother eventually entered the kitchen. She appeared to have had little sleep. She simply got a cup of coffee and sat across from me without saying anything at first. It was strange that neither of us knew how to respond to the awkward silence. The stillness was finally broken by her. She spoke softly and wearily. "Honey, I know things have gotten out of hand." I just stared at my coffee and waited for her to continue without saying anything. Even though I knew she would have to apologize in some way, I wasn't going to let her get away with it. She went on, her voice shaking slightly. "I didn't realize how bad things had gotten between you and your brother. I guess I didn't see how unfair it was to you. We were just trying to help them." I was surprised by that. At least not this quickly. I didn't think she would confess. I briefly believed that perhaps she was finally realizing that I wasn't the bad guy in this scenario. However, I was still unable to get over my irritation with all that had transpired. With a stronger tone than I meant, I responded, "You didn't just ignore what I wanted. You always took his side, as if you thought I would give in and let them have whatever they wanted." She stared down at her coffee for a few seconds before speaking. "I understand," she muttered. "However, we reasoned that you've always been the more resilient one. He has never had it easy, Jake." She always used that as an excuse. Jake required more help, he wasn't strong, and he had struggled more. Since I was the one with my life together, it seemed as though they didn't believe I had any boundaries. "You also believe that I've had it easy?" With my rage seething just below the surface, I asked. "This residence was purchased by me. The mortgage is paid by me. The groceries are paid for by me. Do you really believe that I can continue carrying you all indefinitely?" She nodded and groaned. "You're correct. We couldn't have asked for anything more from you. However, Jake, the baby, is on the way." I interrupted her. "The baby is not the point of this. You guys haven't shown me any respect, and this is about that." She looked tired as she sighed once again. "We believed we were acting appropriately," she ultimately stated. "Emma and Jake don't have much." "And who is to blame for that?" I fired back. "I didn't request that they move in. None of this was requested of me. You can't keep saving them by putting me in a bad position. They need to learn how to live their own lives." She seemed to finally comprehend, or at least attempt to, as she nodded. She said, "We'll figure something out," in a softer tone. "But don't push us away, please. Not in this manner." I tried to relax and sat back. Since they were my parents, I didn't want to expel them. However, I also couldn't continue to live this way. They would have to leave if things didn't change. I said, as quietly as possible, "I don't want to push you out. However, things must change. I can't continue to be treated like I don't belong in my own home." She simply nodded silently without arguing. "All right," she said. "We'll find a solution." She then walked out of the kitchen, leaving me to think alone once more. At least it seemed like they were beginning to take me seriously. Even though I wasn't sure if anything would actually change. When Jake eventually arrived later that afternoon, he appeared to have been holding his rage all day. He simply dropped down across from me in the living room, wearing the same angry look he had worn ever since I delivered him the eviction notice, without saying hello or anything else. I also remained silent and focused solely on my phone. "So this is how things will be?" At last, he spat, his voice dripping with resentment. "Are you really going to expel us?" I hardly raised my gaze. "I gave you a day. I'm going to contact the police if you're still here tomorrow." Jake snorted and shook his head as if I were the villain. "We are related. You don't treat your family like this." I reclined back in my chair and placed my phone down. "Yes, family members also don't take advantage of one another. Do you really think you can just take over my house after weeks of freeloading without doing anything?" "Jake, I'm not your backup plan." After that, he didn't say much. For a minute, he sat there, obviously wanting to dispute, but he ran out of things to say. He understood I wasn't bluffing because I had outlined my criteria. Jake stood up, mumbling to himself, and went off again after a few more uncomfortable moments of stillness. Jake was typical, always fleeing when he didn't get his way. Almost too peacefully, the remainder of the day went by. Even though I had no idea what Jake and Emma would do, I wasn't going to change my mind. They had more than enough time to work things out, yet all they had done was snoop me. Everything would be decided in the following 24 hours. Second update, I got up early once more on the morning of their eviction deadline. I was aware that today would either be the day Jake and Emma moved out or compelled me to file a lawsuit. Oddly enough, I no longer felt angry. I didn't even feel nervous. The only thing left to do was to follow through on what I had already recognized had to happen. The home was still eerily quiet when I woke up and went into the kitchen. Almost like the quiet before a storm, it felt different. Even though the refrigerator was still very empty from Jake and Emma's most recent grocery run, I prepared myself some breakfast. I was able to pull together enough money for a good supper, and as I ate, I couldn't help but reflect on how quickly things had gotten out of hand. It was all right only a few months ago. I was doing well with my parents. Life was wonderful, I was working, and I was paying my expenses. Everything went haywire when Jake and Emma arrived. When individuals begin to feel entitled to things they didn't earn, it's amazing how quickly things can shift. I heard footsteps in the corridor a few hours later. After entering the kitchen and getting a cup of coffee, my dad took a seat at the table across from me. At first, he sipped his coffee and gazed out the window without saying anything. I couldn't tell whether he was upset with me or simply unsure of how to respond. The silence was finally broken by him. He muttered, "Jake and Emma are leaving today." I took a while to reply. Although I felt awful about it, I knew that this was the proper thing to do. I couldn't continue to allow them to exploit me, and if it meant they had to go, then so be it. With a quiet voice my dad remarked, "They have nowhere to go. Until they work things out, they will be staying at a hotel for a while." Mid-bite, I paused and turned to face him. I did experience some guilt, but I pushed it away right immediately. They hadn't done anything to help themselves, even though I had given them plenty of time to get their act together. I said in a firm voice, "I gave them a chance. They gave me no other option." My father did not quarrel. He simply nodded and took another sip of his coffee, without attempting to guilt-trip me as I had assumed he would. I believe he eventually realized that this time, I wasn't going to back down. We couldn't return to the way things were after everything that had transpired. Jake and Emma began packing their belongings at lunchtime. I spent the majority of it in my room because I didn't want to argue with anyone else or hear more passive-aggressive remarks. However, I knew something was going to happen when I heard Jake's voice growing louder from down the corridor after a time. Jake did really knock on my door. He was standing there with the same irate expression he had had since the beginning of this whole situation when I opened it. "Are you really going to allow this to occur?" His voice was stern as he inquired. "You're simply going to dismiss us in this manner?" I leaned against the doorframe with my arms crossed. "I gave you a day. You were aware of what had to occur." Jake clenched his jaw, obviously attempting to control his rage. "Dude, we're family. You don't treat your family like this." I inhaled deeply while attempting to maintain my composure. "Families do not exploit one another. I won't throw you out without cause. For weeks, you have been wasting your time here without making any contributions. I've been covering everything, including the groceries and the mortgage. And you attempted to evict me from my own home and seize my room instead of showing gratitude. I will not allow that to occur." For a few seconds Jake remained silent. He was obviously furious, but he had nothing more to dispute about. Even though he didn't want to acknowledge it, he knew I was correct. "That's it then?" At last he muttered in a quiet voice. "You're simply dismissing us." I answered, "I'm giving you the same option I gave you yesterday. You have two options. Either move somewhere else or respect my personal space by remaining in the guest room. However, you're going to leave if you're unable to accomplish it." Jake gave me one last look, then turned and left without saying anything else. I took a deep breath and shut the door. Although I knew it had to be done, the entire scenario had been draining. Jake and Emma had left by mid-afternoon. Sincerely, I didn't want to watch them go, so I didn't. A dramatic farewell was unnecessary. Without a word to me, they packed up their belongings, put them in their car and drove away. After they left, the house was calmer and less tense. For the remainder of the day I didn't hear much from my parents. They were probably still assimilating everything that had transpired. Despite her outward signs of distress, my mother remained silent. Perhaps she now understood that Jake and Emma had pushed me too far, and this was the outcome, and that I wasn't the cause of it all. My mother knocked on my door that night. She entered, took a seat on my bed's edge and gazed at the floor for a long time. She was clearly struggling to find the proper words. She whispered, "They're gone." Without a word I nodded. She said, "I never thought it would get to this point. I was unaware of the amount of pressure we were placing on you." I felt some of the frustration subside as I gazed at her. I tried to defend my position by saying, it's not that I didn't want to help. However, you guys treated me as if my needs and personal space weren't significant. She nodded and groaned. You're correct, we ought to have noticed it sooner. For several minutes, neither of us really knew what to say next, so we sat in silence. Although I could tell she was upset, at least she now appeared to get my point. After a while, I broke the stillness and said, I don't want you and Dad to leave. But I can't continue living this way if things don't change. She stood up slowly and nodded once more. We'll work it out, she said. I promise, things will be different. I experienced an odd mixture of relief and fatigue as she walked out of the room. There was still work to be done with my parents, but the matter with Jake and Emma was finally resolved. Even though I knew it wouldn't be simple, at least they seemed open to listening now. I felt as though I could breathe for the first time in weeks. The strain that had been choking me was gone, and the house was silent. Although it wasn't a flawless solution, I was at least able to regain my privacy and, more significantly, my respect. The house fell into a spooky silence when Jake and Emma left. Although I felt as though I could breathe at last, the incident continued to nag at the back of my mind. Even though I had won the fight for my room and my respect, I still questioned whether or not my relationship with my parents would ever truly return to normal. There was no turning back after I had drawn a firm line. Nevertheless, I thought that we could manage to proceed without all of the stress. The following days were peaceful, almost too quiet. My parents were largely private. Occasionally, my mother would say something courteous, but we never discussed the incident. My dad, who has always been the more reticent one, seems to completely avoid any confrontational situations. I wasn't sure if they were still processing everything that had happened or if this was their way of giving me space. In any case, I was fine with the silence. In order to avoid thinking about anything, I threw myself into my work in my home office for the majority of the day. Now, the office served as both my haven and my escape from the turmoil of the previous several weeks. However, I would occasionally catch myself reflecting on how things had transpired. Even though I knew I had made the correct decision, I couldn't help but feel a little awful about how everything had gone so wrong. Something had to give because I had been taken advantage of for far too long. A week or so following Jake and Emma's departure, my mother entered my office as I was working. She seemed to be thinking about something, judging by the way she hovered at the entrance. Are you free for a moment? Her voice was strangely gentle as she inquired. I turned to her and nodded, saving my work. What's going on? She nervously wrung her hands as she entered the room. Everything has been on my mind, including Jake, Emma, and our treatment of you. I remained silent so she could talk. She seemed to have something she wanted to talk about. Her voice cracked slightly as she said, I just wanted to say that we didn't mean to make you feel like you didn't matter. We believed that we were assisting Jake, but now I realize that we were overburdening you. We took advantage of the fact that you have done more for us than we could have ever dreamed for. I apologize. I was taken by surprise by the apology. Although I had anticipated some sort of recognition soon, it was more painful for me to hear her express it so bluntly. Her honesty was evident in her eyes, and for the first time in a long time, I had the impression that she genuinely knew how I was feeling. I tried to speak steadily as I said, Thank you, Mom. However, it was more than simply the house or the money. Respect was at issue. I had the impression that none of you respected me or the work I was doing to keep things going. Although I didn't mind assisting, I couldn't continue to live like this. She wiped a tear from the corner of her eye and nodded. You're correct. We ought to have honored your personal space. It won't occur once more. Long emotional chats weren't my thing, but this one felt essential. I felt as though a burden had been removed, and I could now envision a way forward free from ongoing conflict and animosity. I got a little regretful grin from my mom, and she went back to the kitchen. For several minutes, I sat there, taking in what had been spoken. Although it was not a complete resolution, it was a positive step. A few weeks later was the actual turning moment. By that time, a new routine had been established in the house. The unpleasant atmosphere that had pervaded every room since Jake and Emma's departure had gradually subsided, and my parents were more considerate of my personal space. After living in a battle zone for the past few months, I could finally feel the house turning back into a home. My dad was seated at the kitchen table one evening, looking especially serious, when I got home after an office meeting. Typically, my dad preferred to leave most of the hard talking to my mom. However, I could tell he had something significant to say by the way he was sitting and looking into his coffee cup. Trying to keep things informal, I said, Hey, and got a drink out of the refrigerator. Is everything all right? His countenance was contemplative as he looked up. I've wanted to speak with you. Curious but not really concerned with what he had to say, I took a seat across from him. Leaning forward with his hands clasped in front of him, he inhaled deeply. About the house and all of your efforts to maintain this place. I remained silent since I could tell he needed to vent. His voice was low as he started. I realize I haven't said much. However, I've given it a lot of thought. I want you to know how much I appreciate all that you have done for this family, more than any of us could have ever imagined. I was surprised. Hearing my dad speak those words felt important because he wasn't the kind to open up like this. He went on. You've carried more than your fair share, and you didn't ask for any of this. I apologize for the way things ended between Jake and Emma, and I just wanted to let you know that I see it. It struck me differently when he acknowledged everything I had gone through than when my mother apologized, because I could see he had been holding on to this for some time. Although neither meant more than the other, my dad's reserved demeanor somehow gave his remarks a deeper meaning. I said, "Thanks, Dad," since I was at a loss for words. That is very significant. He took another sip of his coffee and nodded. All I want is for things to improve for everyone. Although the chat was brief, it was sufficient. He seemed sincere, and I had the impression that things were at last beginning to improve at that precise moment. Over the next few weeks, things kept getting better. I no longer felt like I was bearing the burden of the home by myself once my parents and I established a new routine. They began to assist more, cleaning, helping with groceries, and generally showing me respect for my personal space. Although it wasn't flawless, it was a significant step up from our previous situation. After they departed, I didn't hear much from Jake and Emma. According to my mom, they were looking for a place of their own and were spending some time in a motel. I refrained from prying. Even though I adored my brother, I needed him to learn how to be independent, so I had set clear limits. I'd be happy to stay away for a while if that meant it. About a month after the entire incident, Jake texted me one afternoon. It was succinct and direct, not his typical tone, but it sounded genuine. Hey, I understand that things went wrong. I simply wanted to apologize for the way things turned out. I hope we can speak soon as we work things out. I looked at the message for a long time, unsure of how to react. A part of me was grateful for the gesture, but another part of me was still upset about how everything had turned out. I took a while to respond. It took me longer to process. I took some time that evening to write a response, attempting to be polite yet explicit about my position. I appreciate the message. I'm happy that you two are working things out. I need some time, but I hope we can communicate soon as well. When both of us are ready, let's catch up. A weird sensation of closure came over me as I pushed send. Even though I didn't expect things to be flawless, at least we could communicate once more. A few weeks ago, that was more than I could have imagined. I started to feel more at ease with everything as time passed. My parents were finally accepting my boundaries, and there was no longer any tension in the house. Above all, I regained my sense of control over my life and my personal space. The journey here was not simple. One of the most difficult things I had ever had to do was to stand up for myself, especially when it meant going against my family. However, it was ultimately worthwhile. I had gained an important lesson. Even in your own family, respect is something you have to earn. It is not something you can demand. I had earned mine too. In retrospect, I'm happy I didn't give up. It would have been simple to give in and let Jake and Emma take over my room, to allow my parents to continue to manage the house as if I were a visitor. I didn't want that life though. I'd longed for my own personal space and dignity, and suddenly I had both. Perhaps Jake and Emma's situation will change in the future. Perhaps we'll be as close as we were before all of this drama. However, for the time being, I'm only concerned with living my life as I need to, and for the first time in a long time, that feels sufficient. Paid for my wife's family vacation, but sister-in-law excluded me. At checkout, when she expected me to cover her bill, I made her pay. I never imagined feeling this depressed while lounging in an upscale Miami Beach resort. A family vacation that was supposed to be unforgettable has become a nightmare because of my sister-in-law, Ella, 38F. I am accompanied by my wife, Ray, 42F, her aging parents, 76M and 70F, and Ella. We have been married for 10 amazing years. I'm already at my wit's end because of Ella's treatment of me just 2 days into this vacation. Over the past 10 years, Ray and I have established a pleasant life together. We have both put in a lot of effort to get to the senior positions we currently hold at our respective firms. Our success is reflected in our lifestyle. To break up the routine of our hectic lives, we take at least 3 large vacations a year in addition to a number of weekend excursions. We are able to travel widely since we decided not to have children. We've made it a point to take Ray's parents along on one of our yearly vacations for the past 2 years. Her mother finds it difficult to travel with her father alone as his health has been progressively deteriorating. The trip this summer was particularly meaningful because Ray's father had mentioned that he had always wanted to go to Miami, where he and his wife had gone on their honeymoon almost 50 years prior. He spoke of it with a certain fervor that betrayed a dread that this would be his final opportunity to relive those treasured recollections. Given how expensive a week in Miami would be, I promptly turned down his offer to help with the costs. I wanted to do this for these individuals since they have been treating me like their own kid for the past 10 years. I can easily afford such costs because of my financial circumstances, and it was well worth the money to witness their happiness upon returning to Miami. When Ella asked to go with us, our journey took a very different turn. Ella has always been in a hard spot financially, unlike Ray and me. Her husband's salary hardly meets the necessities for her 3 school-age children. She would always remark that she hadn't been able to afford a real vacation since her honeymoon whenever we shared pictures from our trips. She came up to us directly this year about going to Miami. I consented even though I knew I would be responsible for all of her costs. Family should support family, after all. Ella's behavior seemed strange from the moment we arrived in Miami. Only a few hours after arriving at our beach resort, the first warning sign arrived. Ella recommended that the family take a picture in front of the breathtaking ocean scenery. In order to get everyone in the photo, I grabbed my phone and prepared to set the timer. She stopped me at that point. "Oh, would you just snap the photo for us? Mom, Dad, Ray and I are the only 4 people we desire." Her remarks were like a kick to the face. I said nothing, figuring they might have preferred a single picture of their original family. However, this was not an isolated incident. Ella made it the central topic of our trip. She would find a way to keep me out of every restaurant, tourist attraction, and special occasion. She kept saying, "Oh, just the 4 of us," or, "This one's just for family." I took over as the official photographer, spending all of my time behind the lens rather than creating memories with my wife and in-laws. Even worse, Ella began sharing these pictures on social media, fabricating a story about this family vacation in which I didn't exist. My in-laws would encourage me to participate in the pictures, and Ray would occasionally step in and stress that I was also family, but Ella always managed to sway the situation until I was back in front of the camera. For their ideal family reunion, I seemed to be nothing more than a walking ATM and personal photographer. I was looking forward to unwinding in the immaculate pool with its stunning ocean view after a long day of trekking and touring. I was about to enter the water when Ella hit me once again. "Will you be able to stay out a while? We want a picture of a girl that only includes Mom, Ray and me." What began as a seemingly simple request ended up involving me standing by the pool for an hour while Ella staged an ongoing photo session. The women appeared first, followed by a picture of a sibling and then another original family picture. Every time I attempted to join them, she would come up with a new combination that conveniently left me out. If my presence was such a hassle, I couldn't help but wonder why she had bothered to come on this vacation. The following day's boat ride incident was far more obvious. When we got to the tourist destination, they provided calm boat rides along the shore. Families with 4 people would love the boat's 2 rows of 2 seats apiece. However, we were only 5. Ella stepped right in with her idea before anybody else could offer a reasonable rotation scheme. She insisted that this arrangement would be perfect for family photos, and made arrangements for Ray's parents to sit together in 1 row while she took the seat next to Ray in the second. In the subsequent boat, I found myself surrounded by strangers. They also purchased a memento of their boat ride with the family. This is the text, punctuated and clearly divided into paragraphs. Currently, Ella's social media feed features the picture. My entire holiday experience was well captured in the souvenir photo from the boat excursion, when I was awkwardly crammed between strangers as my wife and her family had wonderful memories without me. I couldn't help but observe that I was always the one who had to be left out of any situation. Even though I was paying for this entire vacation, Ella never once volunteered to trade places or take turns being the odd one out. It was the same for dinner at the fancy seafood restaurant. I had been looking forward to this reservation for weeks, particularly asking for a prime table with an unhindered view of the sunset at one of Miami's most upscale waterfront restaurants. The hostess escorted us to a circular table for 6 when we got there, which was well situated to capture the golden hour light across the ocean. Ray's parents were seated across from us, and I had imagined us sitting together and taking in the scenery while we shared this beautiful time. Since Ella was a last-minute addition to our trip, she might have easily grabbed a seat on the side. Rather, Ella sat beside Ray before anyone could even bring out a chair, and her parents, of course, took the best seats. With my back to the sunset, I had deliberately planned this dinner around. I was forced into the worst conceivable position, between Ray's parents and the crowded server station. Ella's true colors came out when Ray attempted to defend me by proposing that we reorganize the seating. Telling Ray to stop being so clingy and reminding everyone that this was a family holiday, she yelled at her sister. As the evening wore on, the dinner only grew worse. I made an effort to engage in the discussion in the hopes of discovering some points of agreement, but Ella had other ideas. She would purposefully direct the conversation away from me and toward things like high school escapades, family inside jokes, and childhood recollections whenever I tried to participate. Ella would constantly interrupt and reroute the conversation, even when Ray and her parents attempted to incorporate me by providing background or making connections between stories and current affairs. I felt like an outsider peering in at my own dinner table because of the unbreakable wall of shared history she built. I had stopped attempting to join in by the time dessert came. It was during our scheduled spa day that the last insult occurred. I had carefully set up private suites in the resort's opulent spa, one for Ella alone, one for her parents, and one for Ray and myself. I believed that the four of us could still enjoy the spa treatments together until my father-in-law opted to stay back at the beach because he wasn't feeling well. Ella, however, saw another chance to keep me out. She smiled and said they needed a girls' day at the spa, so I should keep her father company instead. She was once again forcing me to cancel an event I had organized and paid for, and she was using my father-in-law's illness as leverage to make me appear self-centered if I objected. The manipulation was clear. Despite not going as planned, the day ended up being better than I had anticipated. My father-in-law and I had one of our most sincere talks ever while we were sitting on the beach. We connected in a level we had never experienced before as he told us stories about his life and gave insights from his years of expertise. I wanted to vent my aggravation that had been building up over the trip by telling him how his younger daughter was treating me. However, I couldn't bring myself to burden him with family trouble when I watched him relish the ocean wind and share his recollections with such contentment. One night in our hotel room, I had attempted to have a private conversation with Ray about this. She admitted that I felt upset, but her remark only made me more perplexed. She explained how their father's frequent military deployments had affected their childhood and implied that Ella's actions might not have been deliberate. Ella may be frantically attempting to relive those lost family times as their father's health deteriorates. They seldom ever took formal family holidays together. I started to doubt myself after hearing Ray's explanation. Did I come out as too sensitive? I was paying for the vacation, so was it improper of me to expect to be included? I realized how much Ella's actions had damaged my confidence since I was even doubting my right to be wounded. Update 1. The influx of encouraging comments I received after posting about my difficulties online confirmed what I'd been feeling all along. People remarked that Ella's exclusionary behavior was too regular to be coincidental and that her behaviors demonstrated deliberate aim rather than careless oversight. Their viewpoints made it clearer to me that this was about fundamental respect and acknowledgement as a family member, not about having the right to be included just because I paid. My wife attempted to use their early experiences to justify her sister's actions, but the truth was more straightforward. Whatever Ella's reason, what she was doing wasn't acceptable. The persistent isolation and disrespect had gotten out of hand by the last few days of our journey to Miami. My breaking point was finally reached the morning before we left. In our hotel room, I sought some alone time with Ray and confronted her about her passive attitude during the trip, but her response remained centered on maintaining harmony. Although she admitted to observing Ella's actions, she maintained that confronting her would just cause drama and ruin what might be one of their father's final family vacations. Although what she said made sense, it seemed like yet another betrayal. Once more, family unity was being sacrificed at the expense of my sentiments. Something changed inside of me at that very instant. I nodded in agreement with Ray's request to move on, but my mind was already working out a strategy. Ella had joyfully savored the opulent lodging and facilities I was offering her, and she had spent the entire vacation treating me like an unwanted stranger. She seems to have forgotten that I was paying for every meal, activity, and spa treatment she had received during this entire trip. Maybe it was time to let her know exactly what it meant to pretend that I wasn't a member of the family. I started my strategy on the last morning we were in Miami. Claiming that Ella and I would follow, I casually advised Ray to take her parents to the airport before us. Ray quickly saw through my motives. "I understand what you're attempting to accomplish," she muttered. Her little nod was all the acknowledgement I needed. "Sure you know," I said, "and now you can remain neutral, as you have been for the whole trip." Ray appeared prepared to let karma run its course after observing her sister routinely keep me out of every family gathering for a week. When they were gone, I brought my well-thought-out plan to the front desk. The hotel's billing method was advantageous to me. All extra fees accrued during the stay were paid at checkout, even though the room rates had been paid in advance. Assuming I would pay for everything, this included every room service order, spa treatment and poolside cocktail Ella had freely consumed. In an attempt to justify it for tax purposes, I asked the management to divide the bills by suite. The request was so routine that the manager didn't even bat an eye. I couldn't help but think about how Ella had never considered the financial or emotional consequences of her actions as I stood there watching him come to terms with the separation. That was about to change. I paid for my own accommodation and my in-laws' suite and then waited for the big reveal. Ray's father's mobility challenges and wheelchair arrangements required additional time, so she and her parents were already en route to the airport. Ella and I were alone in the hotel lobby after that. Ella's face was devoid of color as she gazed at the itemized bill in her hands when the manager summoned her down to settle her account. The sum was astounding, likely many months' worth of her typical spending. As reality struck in, her uncertainty turned to panic as her gaze shifted between the bill and my face. "You're not covering mine?" Then I remained calm. "I've already paid for my family. You can cover for yourself." Ella struggled with her credit card and gave it to the manager, her hand trembling a little. My suspicions were only verified by the declined transaction notification. She had been living far beyond her means for the entire week, confident that I would pay for it. Her credit limit was not even close to covering half of her debt, even when the manager swiped her card once again. She was now feeling the effects of all those girls-only spa days and fancy dinners, and this time, her assigned ATM wasn't saving her. It was pure theater for the next half hour in the hotel lobby. Ella paced back and forth, attempting to come up with a plan for dealing with this sudden issue. She would look at me frantically every few minutes, obviously hoping that I would give in and offer to pay, but I remained seated on the comfortable couch in the lobby, appearing composed while relishing every moment of her situation. I knew that if she had just apologized for her actions during the journey, I could have ended her agony with a swipe of my card. However, Ella's pride prevented her from doing so. Rather, as though she still had the right to my money after a week of treating me like an unwanted invader, she wanted me to offer to help. She finally took the call she had been putting off. As she described the circumstances, I could hear her husband's anger rising over the phone. He was demanding to know how she could spend so carelessly, as the bill she had accrued was almost equal to his entire monthly salary. The money was finally transmitted to pay the account after what seemed like an eternity of difficult conversations and perhaps some desperate promises on her part. Ella sat quietly in the taxi on the way to the airport, perhaps still analyzing her husband's reaction upon her return home. Her problems were far from done, but she was unaware of this. She found out I hadn't finished her flight check-in when we got to the airport, which was already getting close to departure time. She was left standing in the ordinary line, fumbling with her bags and getting more and more agitated as she watched the minutes pass, while I breezed through priority check-in. When I had discreetly booked business class upgrades for Ray, her parents, and myself at the gate, a pleasant surprise to round off their trip comfortably, that was the last straw. But Ella stuck with her original budget seat. The full tale was conveyed by the expression on her face as she walked past our roomy business class seats. She remained silent, but her stiff posture and clenched jaw said a lot. We had first-class service up front, but she sat in economy the whole time. At last, Ella's calmness broke the instant we touched down. Tears were streaming down her face as she started into her account of events, virtually running to her parents at baggage claim. Her dramatic account claimed that I had purposefully denied her the flight upgrades, humiliated her in public, and left her at the hotel. Conveniently, she omitted the bit about her week-long effort to keep me out of every family activity. As she went on with her performance, her father, who was already exhausted from the trip, became clearly upset. She was too preoccupied with portraying herself as the victim of my alleged mistreatment to care about his health, even at this precise moment. Throughout Ella's performance, I remained composed and waited for the appropriate opportunity to argue my position. When I did talk, I described how she had deliberately kept me out of every family activity while on a trip that I had paid for. One by one, I exposed every family-only picture, every stage sitting arrangement, and every purposefully private conversation. The reasoning was straightforward. Why should she ask me to pay for her costs as family if she didn't think of me as family enough to be included in the memories? When her mother stepped in, her performance abruptly stopped. Ray's mother had had enough of her daughter's antics after a week. Firmly, "Ella, enough," she said. "We don't want to get involved. We noticed you cornering him the whole time. We urged you to include him, but you had your own plans to sideline him. Now deal with it." Ella reacted even more brutally, refusing to take responsibility. When she accused me of controlling the family with money, her true colors came out. "You partnered with your husband to humiliate your sister, your own blood," she yelled, turning to face Ray. "You'll see what this man is going to do to you. He's going to sleep with another woman right under your nose, and you won't be able to do anything. You're blinded by his money." Ray responded angrily to the unfounded accusation, making the baggage claim area seem like a scene from a family drama. Without Ray's father, the situation might have been worse. He had sat in respectful silence the entire journey, watching everything but saying little. His straightforward remark, "Ella, your brother-in-law has done enough for you. If you can't appreciate it, better keep your mouth shut," put an end to Ella's outburst, but the harm to family ties had already been done. There was a profound stillness in the airport terminal following my father-in-law's last remarks. With quiet firmness, he asked to depart right away, and I hurriedly assisted him to the car. Ella stood there by herself as we drove off. Even though she was 70 miles from home, she was too proud to beg for a ride. I knew the taxi fee would be exorbitant because she had arrived with us and hadn't brought her own car to the airport. However, after a week of her purposeful seclusion, I lost the will to care. It was a quiet journey to my in-laws' house. They both sincerely thanked us for the vacation when we got there. The extended embrace from my father-in-law conveyed more than words could possibly express. Everything was validated by that hug. After we got home, Ray and I resumed our regular routines and at first avoided talking about what had transpired. Until Ray finally broke the quiet a few days later, the subject remained unexplored. She disclosed that Ella was dealing with severe financial repercussions. Her husband was seeking full reimbursement since he was upset over having to save her. Ella found it difficult to handle the payback as well as her usual credit card obligations when he declined to save her pompous butt, as he described it. Ray was in favor of what I was doing, but she subtly hinted that I could have gone too far. However, she admitted that her sister had required this wake-up call even as she was saying it. For years, Ella had treated people with disdain and exploited their charity. It felt like long overdue justice that she was now being held accountable for her acts. I was able to honestly respond that I didn't regret my choices when Ray asked. Ella had selected her own tuition, by her actions, and often the most expensive lessons are also the most successful. An update on Thanksgiving: I got a range of responses after posting my tale online. Some said that I was too severe and that I ought to have just paid the price to maintain harmony. In order to finance everyone's lavish vacation, they wanted me to be a doormat and silently accept being treated like an outsider. However, I refuse to be used that way since I'm aware of my value. I only wanted Ella to be treated with basic respect and included in family events. I never intended her to grovel or become my servant. Her pride was more important to her than making amends, yet even after everything, I would have paid for her expenditures if she had just admitted her mistake and apologized. In actuality, Ella and I never had a close relationship. When she would visit Ray, our interaction was limited to courteous greetings at family events. Over the years, we didn't have any meaningful conversations or a true connection. Nevertheless, because she was family, I readily agreed to pay for her trip when she requested to go on the vacation. That kindness ought to have at least gained her some fundamental respect, but instead it seemed to strengthen her resolve to keep me out of her life. Ella's husband was still furious that he had to spend all of his money to pay for her exorbitant expenses. She had accrued a bill that was almost equivalent to his monthly wage. If their spouse spent a week acting like a princess on someone else's alleged dime, no working individual would be pleased to see their hard-earned money go. However, rather than take ownership of her actions, Ella did what she does best, which is to fabricate a story in which I am the villain who purposefully humiliated her and she is the victim. Knowing that Thanksgiving might be one of the final holidays spent with my father-in-law due to his deteriorating health, my mother-in-law had been organizing an extra special celebration during the planning stages. However, Ella's husband's refusal to go threw a wrench in the preparations. Why? He couldn't tolerate being seated at the same table as someone who would make fun of someone who wasn't as wealthy. My mother-in-law finally had enough at that point. She sat him down and told him everything about Ella's actions on the trip to Miami. She said to him, "Check out the pictures from the vacation. Really look at them." Ella's own social media post had photo after photo of me being purposefully left out, shoved behind the camera, or forced to sit apart. It was impossible to ignore the visible evidence of my systematic exclusion. My mother-in-law described how she and my father-in-law had made several attempts to involve me, but Ella had always found new methods to keep me out of the picture. I had always respected Ella's husband, so this was very painful. Although we weren't close friends, we always had cordial and courteous interactions on Thanksgiving and other holidays. I had never denigrated him because of his financial circumstances. I had never even entertained such ideas. We were only two men who had joined the same family and were doing our best to provide for our wives and help out where we could. Ella would go to great lengths to avoid accepting responsibility for her actions, as seen by the way she had tricked him into viewing me as a classist villain. After everything that had transpired, I was hesitant to attend Thanksgiving dinner, but I went out of respect for my father-in-law. A convenient explanation of visiting his parents was used to justify Ella and her husband's absence. The true story, which was far more repulsive than I had anticipated, didn't surface until after my father-in-law had gone to bed. It seemed that a significant argument in Ella's marriage had been sparked by the Miami incident. Instead of gaining humility from the event, she had used her shame as fuel to continuously disparage her husband based on his income. Even though she only worked 20 hours a week as a part-time employee, she started pressuring him to take on a second job on top of his full-time job. He accepted the reasonable requirement that he take a break from childcare and domestic chores in exchange for looking for more work. This concession infuriated Ella. Ella's husband had sobbed while telling her everything, according to my mother-in-law. It was astounding how much was expected of him. While she had a relaxed schedule, Ella wanted him to work well over 40 hours a week and still handle his fair share of household duties. It seems that the entitled attitude that had been so noticeable during our trip to Miami was only the beginning. After spending a week accruing debt she was unable to pay, the woman was now criticizing her diligent husband for not giving her a more opulent lifestyle. Ella's mother-in-law had done everything she could to help her see the light. She tried to convince Ella that her demands were unrealistic, supported her son-in-law, and gave advice to her daughter. However, it appeared that Ella had become dangerously aroused by the taste of luxury during our journey to Miami. Once claiming to be happy with modest family holidays, the woman was suddenly consumed with leading a life she hadn't earned. The situation got so bad that my mother-in-law had to give a firm order at last. She bluntly advised Ella that she shouldn't count on the family's support if her actions resulted in a divorce. More significantly, she was cautioned not to discuss marital issues with her father because the stress of seeing his daughter's marriage fall apart due to her newfound materialism was too much for his health. Ray and I thought about how our well-meaning invitation had gone awry on the way home from Thanksgiving dinner. There's no turning back once you taste the luxury of a private island. I recalled a remark I'd seen on display at the resort. Once you experience the luxury of a private island, you'd never set foot on a public one. This also applied to someone who had entered business class after years of economy. Her spouse was now suffering because we had unintentionally allowed Ella to see a way of life she couldn't support. I felt bad about the whole thing, not because I forced her to pay her own expenses, but because I exposed her to a lifestyle that had so thoroughly distorted her viewpoint. She momentarily had luxury, but now her husband, a kind man who worked hard to support his family, was being punished for not being able to sustain it. All I could do was hope she would change her mind before ruining her marriage to live a lifestyle she couldn't afford. Mom secretly changed my wedding cake order and doesn't know I found out. What should I do? Original post, September 26, 2023. My fiancé and I get married this fall, and the cake has been a huge point of contention with my mom. Long saga, but the gist is that we wanted a dessert bar or cheesecake instead of a traditional cake. My mom initially insisted on having at least a small cake for just us to cut. We compromised and got quotes. Right before we put a deposit down, she decided that having just a cake for us and not for guests is tacky, so we needed to get a sheet cake to serve as well. We were annoyed because she was the one to suggest it, so we cut our losses and opted to do tiered cheesecake and mini cheesecakes, as we originally wanted. My mom would not let this go for the past 6 months. She then decided to focus on pushing for a groom's cake. My fiancé did not want one. When I told her this, she said it's really only a groom's cake in name and not about what he wants. I told her a firm no, multiple times because she wouldn't give up. That brings us to this week. I got a text yesterday saying she was at the bakery and paid for the order. I got suspicious because I never included her in those communications. I called the bakery today and was told by a very apologetic employee that my mom had added a multi-tiered groom's cake, with different fillings, flowers, the whole kit and caboodle. We still have cheesecake, but I feel like it'll look silly next to what is essentially a wedding cake. My question now is, what do I do? She doesn't know that I know. I'm furious and hurt. Obviously it's just a cake, but it's not really about that now. She went behind my back and crossed multiple boundaries after I told her no. Am I being a bridezilla for not letting her have her traditional wedding cake? Relevant comment. Comment 1. Why should she have a cake at your wedding? If you don't want cake, just change the order back and call it a day. And add a password for all your vendors moving forward so changes can't be made without it. OOP. Everyone I've spoken to has either been in the camp of, well, they're paying for the wedding, or, not her wedding, not her cake. I think that's why I'm torn because yes, they are paying. But changing the order behind my back. I'm more upset about the violation of trust than the actual cake, I think. Comment 2. It is not just a cake, it is a breach of your boundaries and your wishes. Cancel her order, put a password on all your wedding accounts. You are not marrying her. You are marrying your partner. OOP. Exactly. It's the breach of trust that's been the most upsetting. I need to call back tomorrow and see if it's possible to cancel and get a refund, since she paid in full. I suspect she did that intentionally, thinking she was being so clever. Comment 3. Ask the bakery to convert the cake into additional cheesecake and mini cheesecakes. Maybe a smaller groom's cake, that looks nothing like a wedding cake. Do not tell her you did this. When you go to the bakery, have a password put on the order so it cannot be changed after you make the appropriate changes. She thinks she got something over on you. If she does check on it, the password will stop her from making any other changes. If she shows up at the venue with yet another cake, instruct the people at the venue to put it in the back and not bring it out. OOP. Thanks for the advice. Having the cake changed to more cheesecakes is a good idea. Never in a million years did I think I'd have to become like one of the Redditors and password protect my wedding, but here we are. Update, December 30th, 2023, 3 months later. Hello again. A big thank you to everyone who gave advice on my original post. I'm now married and had the best, most relaxing honeymoon with my now husband without any pesky family bothering us. By the time I posted, it was too late to cancel the wedding due to deposits and contracts, so it continued as planned. And to clarify, yes, my parents did pay for the wedding, although my husband and I made it clear several times that we did not expect or need them to pay for everything. No, I don't think paying excuses for my mom's actions. My parents reiterated that it was our wedding and we should do what we wanted. Clearly the cake was the exception to this, though she had previously said to get cheesecake if that's what we wanted. My husband and I got a laugh out of everyone's suggestions for how to handle the cake. Initially, I wanted to go the petty route and surprise my mom by calling the bakery to change the cake design to something she would find tacky that would reflect my husband's hobbies. You know, like a groom's cake should do. After taking a few days to weigh my options, I knew my desire for petty satisfaction would nuke my relationship with my mom, which had truthfully never had this dynamic up until wedding planning. I knew that she absolutely was the one in the wrong and acting like a child. And while I'm the actual child in the relationship, I wanted to be mature and handle this like an adult, if only for my own moral high ground. I communicated with my parents and listed all the reasons why this situation, and others throughout the wedding planning process, was hurtful and completely out of line. Shock of the century to everyone on Reddit, I'm sure. It didn't go well. There was a series of texts I received from my mom that demonstrated she couldn't take accountability or comprehend that I wasn't mad that she ruined my wedding by ordering a cake, but rather that she went behind my back knowing it would surprise and upset me on my wedding day. I attempted multiple times to redirect to the actual issue with little success. We ended the conversation with her apologizing for a cake making my husband and me so upset. This obviously wasn't a genuine apology or the main issue, even if she thought it was. She also agreed to move the groom's cake to a meal we had the day before the wedding, which I was fine with. At this point we were a week out from the wedding and the thought of continuing to press the issue was too much for me to handle with everything else on my plate. I dropped the rope leading up to the wedding so I could refocus on enjoying my wedding as best as I could. I interacted with my mom as little as possible the day of, and our wedding party and coordinator did a fantastic job being a buffer. While I've had some contact with her since, it has dramatically declined so I can get some much needed space. Obviously we'll need to have some tough conversations, but I'm choosing to spend my time with my new husband, and getting back into therapy, first. Weddings, man. They really bring out the crazy in people. Oh, and the cheesecakes were a huge hit BTW. Relevant comments. Mrs. Neville Bardos. I'm glad you had the day you wanted and enjoyed your honeymoon. Unfortunately, although previously this wasn't the dynamic you had with your mother, the fact she refused to see her error and wasn't apologetic. If I were you, I would bear that in mind for the future, i.e. other major events, children, etc., and plan accordingly. OOP. Oh, absolutely. The lack of respecting boundaries, breaking trust for future life events was actually something I pointed out in our conversation. She didn't seem to understand the point I was making, just kept going back to the cake and not the deeper issue. 1 year update. November 3rd, 2024. I'm back, with a 1 year update on how my mom changed my wedding cake order without me knowing. People have reached out for an update, and coincidentally I've had several friends get engaged who have similar family dynamics as mine. I've shared all of this with them, but I feel the need to blast this out online too. Now that I'm a year out, I can acknowledge that I love my husband and our life together, but having a traditional wedding was a big mistake. When I think back on our wedding day, I am devastated to admit that the few emotions I remember from that day were not how much I love my now husband and excitement over our future together, but anxiety over my mom and whether shit was about to blow up. If you're recently engaged and have difficult family relationships, or aren't completely sold on shelling out a ton of money on a wedding, please let this be yet another loud voice yelling at you. Elope, have a courthouse wedding? Don't invite problematic guests. Do whatever you want to do, but for the love of God avoid that family drama at all costs. I wish I would have stuck to what I originally wanted, eloping somewhere abroad. But alas, I made my decision and have to accept it. What I didn't mention in my initial posts was that my relationship with my mom immediately and irrevocably changed as soon as I became engaged. Even though I knew she could be a lot, I had no idea what I was in for. If I could do it all again, I would have stopped that wedding planning train in its tracks after the first few signs of craziness. The cake was, unsurprisingly, just the last straw of craziness that happened. Greatest hits include telling literally, and I mean literally, everyone she knew that we were getting engaged, less than 10 minutes after my husband told my parents he planned to propose, upon sharing the proposal photos with her, commenting on how big I looked in the photos, which are, to this day, ruined for me, told a family member, who commented on how beautiful I looked at a pre-wedding event, yeah well she's gained a lot of weight. Tried to crash my first look the day of my wedding and acted hurt that she wasn't invited. Did crash my first look and threw a fit when my wedding coordinator wouldn't let her in. Made the wedding all about how she never had a say in anything and that I was the controlling immature one. We do still have contact today, but it's limited and I am very guarded with what I choose to share. She never genuinely apologized or acknowledged the stress and hurt she caused. Short of some major changes on her part, I don't see that happening. So yeah, the moral of the story is to absolutely soak up the fresh excitement of getting engaged. But seriously, ask yourself if there's anyone in your life who will make wedding planning hell on earth. If you're oh so fortunate to have a character like that, have a plan to handle it, and be prepared to enforce those boundaries. And for the extra crazy families out there, maybe just elope. Additional information from OOOP. I see how the wording was misleading and I should have linked the two previous posts. The point of this was more so to serve as a cautionary tale to any engaged couples out there who are dealing with a situation like this. Learn from my mistakes. What starts as little complaints drama can quickly snowball and permanently change relationships if you don't nip it in the bud. OOP on how to handle family issues on wedding planning. OOP, fair enough. I've seen so many couples recently who are having issues with family very early on in wedding planning, so I wanted to share how 1 year later, my family relationships are horrible because of one day and it personally wasn't worth it for me. Yes, I regret not handling it earlier on and picking up on those red flags. Hindsight is 20/20 and life can be more complicated than what's on paper. I was uninvited from a wedding, left humiliated in the rain, while my boyfriend stayed at the event. Am I overreacting? Original post. Today, my 24M partner and I 24F, let's call him Eric, were invited to the wedding of one of his oldest friends from school. We received our save the date months ago, and the invite was addressed to Eric and Vicky. Our invite stated we were invited for the whole shebang, the service, the breakfast and the evening reception. Our RSVP required both of our dietary requirements for the breakfast, which we replied to ages ago. I thought this was pretty awesome and generous of the bride and groom, as I had never met either of them and Eric was only close with the bride, so it was a very nice gesture. The wedding is a few hours away from where we live and since neither of us drive, I booked train tickets in advance which came to about £60 each return and an Airbnb, which worked out at £90 between us. We don't earn a lot so this is quite a big spend to justify. However, since they had invited us to the whole wedding we thought it would be rude not to go. The bride also specified colors we should wear, so I bought a new outfit since I didn't have anything formal that would be suitable. Not the end of the world, but with Christmas coming up it was a bit difficult and I had to be really frugal all through November to make it work. Total spend was probably double what I would spend monthly on fun stuff like going out for dinner or drinks or new clothes. We got to the service and it was beautiful, the bride looked lovely and it was very emotional. I get nervous at weddings, couldn't say why. And so I hadn't eaten beforehand, figuring the 4-course breakfast would fill me up nicely. After the ceremony, we went straight into the venue to have drinks and sit down at tables. We were towards the back of the line into the venue and so half the congregation had already sat down. We glanced at the seating plan, saw Eric's name and headed over. There was no place setting for me. Eric found his name but there weren't any free seats at the table. Eric sat down, and I asked an usher whether there was a mistake. He didn't know, so he waved over the bride. She and I had never met before, but she seemed friendly. Until she opened her mouth. Oh no, you're not part of the breakfast, the invitation was just for the reception and service. You're welcome to come back later. This was in front of most of the guests who had already sat down, in a big venue, probably 140-ish seats. The usher suggested I go to the pub. Eric didn't know what to do but didn't want to cause a scene, so he stayed put and quiet. I quite literally have never felt so embarrassed and humiliated in my life. I left and it was raining heavily. I hadn't brought an umbrella, since it was an indoor wedding. And being in a rural place, I had to walk about 20 minutes to get anywhere else. The usher had suggested a pub where the other guests are, so I just kept walking, but my shoes were literally ruined and soaked through. As well as being pretty damn cold because it's December and I was dressed for a wedding. I got to the pub to find a handful of merrymakers drinking heavily, at 2 p.m., in wedding clothes, introduced myself kind of awkwardly as they were total strangers, and they were luckily really nice. They invited me to sit with them and tell them about the service. All of them had only been invited to the reception. I asked one of them if I could see their invite, and it was crystal clear that they were evening guests. There was no mention of the service or the breakfast, nor their dietary requirements. I apparently was the only person who was invited, and then uninvited, to the whole do. I sat with them and had some food, because I was starving, but they all started leaving to get ready at about 4 p.m. Being a total stranger, I didn't think it best to ask to come with them, but I had never been to this town before and besides Eric, I didn't know anybody. Since being ejected at 1:30 p.m.-ish, I was expected to just hang until 7:30 p.m. when the reception started. So I left. I felt so unwelcome and unwanted that I just wanted to go home. The evening will start in about half an hour, without me, but I just can't bring myself to attend knowing that half the guests watched me being asked to leave by the bride herself. I traded in my train ticket, which was a return for tomorrow, and now I'm traveling back alone. I texted Eric to tell him, but he didn't respond. I've been holding back tears since I was ejected, 6 hours ago, and I feel completely torn. I don't understand what happened with the invite, whether it was a mistake or whether I was just supposed to know that it was only for Eric, despite being addressed to both of us, despite asking for both of our dietary requirements, despite explicitly stating we were invited to the whole wedding. Part of me feels like I should have gone to the evening reception too, but I'm soaked through, my hair and makeup look awful, my shoes are unwearable. I am barefoot on a really gross floor right now, and I'm freezing. I look like a mess and I feel so stupid. Did I mess up here? I feel like I've just been totally fucked over, and I'm really upset that Eric didn't stand up for me or say anything or leave the breakfast with me. Although I think that's less because of malice and more that he's just a bit hopeless when put on the spot. I've never heard of a wedding where you invite a plus one, by name, but then they aren't invited to as much of the wedding as the other half of the couple. Nobody else at the wedding had this happen. I don't see how it can be personal since I've never met any of them before. I'm really upset and can't wrap my head around how weird today has been. If this happened to you, what would you do? TLDR, went to a wedding, got uninvited halfway through. Am I overreacting by being hurt? Edit. So this blew up way more than I expected. Thank you everyone for your words of support, it's really helped and I've gone from a wobbly wet mess to a cackling harpy with my big glass of wine. You guys don't hold back on your opinions and I kinda love it. It's nearly bedtime here, Eric stayed at the party and presumably is still there. I came home and felt a lot better knowing how shitty a situation this was. Karma's a bitch, and when they go low we go high. So I'm going to go to bed and sleep on it and think about next steps in the morning. A lot of people think I should dump Eric, whereas that had never crossed my mind. I was mostly pissed off with the bride and the MOH who may have been involved too, I don't know. Eric will be coming home sometime tomorrow, and we're going to talk. I want to hear his piece because he's been drinking since lunchtime. He might just be a dum-dum rather than a full-blown asshole. Either way, no wind-up sudden decisions right now. I will try to come back and update as and when anything else happens. Thanks everyone. 3 relevant comments. Plain truthiness. The person who messed up was the bride, which is an utter word I don't use but she is, and Eric, who is appalling. I absolutely cannot believe that he didn't walk out with you. What the hell was he thinking? Did he used to date the bride or the bride's sister? Oopie. Funny you say that. The maid of honor is his ex. Although we were not aware until we saw her name in the wedding booklet at the ceremony that she would even be there. However, there is a lot of bad blood between them. If she was going to intervene to remove anybody, it would have been him. Update. Basically, I went to a wedding of my boyfriend's oldest friend from school and got uninvited from the wedding breakfast as it was starting. My boyfriend stayed at the wedding. I hadn't expected the big reaction to my first post, and just want to say thank you to everyone who gave advice and was supportive. I was feeling super shitty when I initially posted, and after an hour of drinking wine and reading your comments I felt a lot more sane and calm. I wanted to clarify a few things that people were confused about or that weren't clear in my first post. I'm in the UK and our weddings are different to the way weddings are held in the US. Traditionally, There is a ceremony, the wedding breakfast, which is a sit-down 3-course meal. Although it's called breakfast, it is usually in the afternoon, followed by speeches, and then an evening reception which is like a disco. It's not uncommon for people to invite only relatives and close friends to the ceremony and breakfast, then invite lots of evening guests for the reception. However, it is uncommon to invite somebody to the ceremony and reception, but not the breakfast, as then they are kind of left to entertain themselves somewhere for 6 hours. Having talked to friends and coworkers since last weekend, what happened to me was a serious no-no in terms of etiquette. Me and Eric have been together for nearly a year and a half, we live together, and we have a pretty strong relationship. He had no past romantic connections with the bride, I'll call her Marie, which some people were asking about. They went to school together from the age of 4, 10, and remained in touch as pen pals, Facebook friends since then. They rarely see each other in person, and the wedding was the first time he would see her in about 2 years. There was zero phone signal at the venue. We noticed this when we arrived for the ceremony and were a little annoyed as the wedding had a hashtag which we couldn't exactly tweet about with no signal. This is important later. We didn't know this until we arrived at the wedding, but the maid of honor, Helen, was Eric's ex-girlfriend. They were together for 3 years, and she cheated on him and dumped him. They have a lot of bad blood and do not have any contact with each other. Okay, so on to the update. After leaving the ceremony, I got straight on the train and went back to my hometown. I was on the train when I wrote my first post. When I got home, I told my parents everything and they weren't particularly impressed, and like most of the posters here, they were perplexed that Eric hadn't come with me. My mum gave me a big hug, ran me a bath and poured me a glass of wine, and I just tried to relax and forget about my day from hell. I still hadn't heard from Eric, but texted him to let him know I was home safe and would see him tomorrow. Eric texted me back at about 9 p.m., asking me what I meant by home or the Airbnb that we had booked nearby to the venue. I clarified, and he said, "Okay, I'll see you tomorrow. Love you so much, X." Didn't really know what to make of it since the whole day had just been such a massive fuck up. So I finished my wine, watched a Disney movie and went to bed. The next morning, given I still hadn't really heard from Eric at all, I assumed he would be getting in at about midday, so I got up early and started wrapping Christmas presents. At 8 a.m. I heard a key in the door and what do you know, it's Eric, still in his crease suit, with red eyes and looking like death. He wasn't really making sense, so I made him have a shower and warm up, made coffee and decided to talk once he was looking human again. We sat down together and pieced together his side of the story. Basically, once I had left, Eric was absolutely livid with Marie. He had frozen like a deer in headlights when she was asking me to go and was kicking himself that he hadn't done the right thing. About 10 minutes after I left, Marie turned around and said, "Oh, actually, a few people haven't turned up. Get Vicky to come back, we have space for her now." And Eric had tried to call me. Because there was no phone signal anywhere near the venue, he couldn't get through, and Marie pretty much immediately said, "Oh well, never mind, she didn't want to be here anyway." Which obviously was a pile of crap, and made Eric feel rubbish. The meal was a very formal, sit-down affair, so he just kind of grinned and bore it, assuming I would be coming back in the evening. Eric was the only person mentioned in the speeches, by Marie's father, who wasn't a family member, and apparently it was clear to everyone how disappointed he was that I wasn't there to share it with him. When I texted him at about 6 p.m. to let him know I was going home, he never received it. He was only able to text me at 9 p.m. by hiking down the road for 5 minutes to find a signal. All the while his ex Helen was being sickly sweet, asking where I was, why didn't I want to come and enjoy the party, was I shy? Apparently with quite the evil glint in her eye, like she had got exactly what she'd wanted. Neither of us knew she was the MOH until we got there, and given their bad relationship, Eric was pretty pissed off that Marie had failed to mention she had such a prominent role in the wedding. Whether Helen was behind the seating error, I don't know, but if she was, then Marie was just as bad in enabling it to happen. So Eric stayed at the wedding, miserably, and went back to the Airbnb afterwards alone. He barely slept, feeling angry at Marie and Helen for fucking with us and at himself for not sticking up for me, and left at 4:30 a.m. to get the first train home, hence why he was back at our place so early. He wasn't really apologetic to me at all, he didn't really seem to see how it was shitty for me. He more felt like he had been insulted by the situation and let down by his oldest friend. He is cutting off Marie and doesn't want anything else to do with her. So, yeah. That was Eric's take on the whole thing. To be honest, I was pretty pissed that in all of this, he hadn't really considered how I felt, or what it had been like for me getting thrown out of the wedding. While what he had gone through was pretty crummy, he at least had been warm, dry and well fed. The indignation of your girlfriend being removed from an event you're at isn't really as bad as being the girlfriend, getting soaked in the rain, feeling humiliated and all the rest. So we talked, And I laid out why I wasn't okay with what had happened and why his reaction wasn't okay. He can be a bit of a lemon sometimes, and this feels like one of those times. He didn't step up to the plate, he just let the world wash over him and acted as a bystander. I'm still hurt by his actions and he still hasn't really apologized properly. I don't know if he understands that he did wrong too. But this isn't a deal breaker for me. It's a heavy straw on the camel's back, but the camel is still standing. We have a really lovely Christmas coming up, and after a really long autumn of working hard, all I want is to go back to the happy place we were before this fuck up, and honestly I don't want to think about it. So, I know a lot of you guys are going to drag me over hot coals for this one, but we're still together. I'm not going to break up with him over this, but it's a big dark mark on his record. As far as I'm concerned, he needs to get a lot of extra credit to get a pass this year, to use a terrible analogy, and I expect him to step up and really try to do better from now on. It's not really an ultimatum, but I'm willing to put this behind us if he can prove to me that he's invested in trying harder in this relationship from now on. If he doesn't, then I won't be sticking around. I love him a lot, but he needs to have my back, and be empathetic to what I'm going through. I'm sorry that this wasn't the victorious breakup update so many of you wanted, but I want a nice happy Christmas together. I'm not ruling it out as an option if things don't improve. But I want to give him another chance to prove this relationship is worth it. TLDR, Eric came home the next day. We talked, we're still together. Top comment. Throw _ switch. Things to think about. If Marie said only 10 minutes after you left that you could stay, why didn't he come and physically find you after his call didn't go through? If Marie said only 10 minutes after you left that you could stay, why didn't he go and find a signal to call you, 5 minutes away, after his call didn't go through? Why didn't he try and find a signal to call you, again, only 5 minutes away, until 9 p.m.? Relevant comments. It's all mine now. So I know a lot of you guys are going to drag me over hot coals for this one, but we're still together. Yeah, that's the important thing. You haven't lost him. And as for dragging you over coals, you're going to be the one to live with this selfish, conceited carpet, so really there's nothing more I can add that would push the point home more than some more occasions where he just dumps you at the side of the road because he's offended by how they disrespected him by treating you badly. Throw the switches comment makes a good point. He didn't even try to catch you up, go down the road to contact you, or even leave in disgust, because all he could think about was his own hurt feelings. You've got a great life coming. OP. I've set a deadline in my head where I need to see significant improvement in a few areas of the relationship, which I have told him is important if he wants us to stay together, and if that doesn't happen, I'm gone. If he messes up big time before then, I'm gone. Just giving him one last chance to pull himself up by his bootstraps and prove it's worth staying for. My sister banned me from her wedding, claiming her fiancé has feelings for me. Now he's refusing to marry her over it. Hello everyone, I'm Michelle, 20F, and I would greatly appreciate your feedback. Emily, 25F, is my older sister, and she is expected to marry Jonathan, 25M. Between them, everything appeared to be ideal. We all believed they were meant to be together, and they had been together for years. However, things have just taken a very odd and surprising turn, and now their wedding is in doubt. Why? My sister won't let me go to their wedding, therefore Jonathan has declined to marry her. Furthermore, Emily thinks Jonathan has feelings for me. I understand how crazy that sounds, but allow me to clarify. For background, I don't have a close relationship with either my parents or my sister. I kind of drifted away from them once I started college, but it's not like anything major happened to trigger a fallout. Since I moved out for school, I haven't really spent much time at home. I would usually travel or go to my grandparents' house during spring holidays rather than returning home. Simply said, it seemed like a better alternative than having to cope with the unpleasantness of being at home. The problem is that I'm not at all like my sister or parents. If it makes sense, we've never really clicked. I'm not truly a part of their universe, which is their own. They never seem to understand me, and to be honest, they never made an effort. They would all bond over something I didn't care about while I was growing up, and it seemed like I was speaking a foreign language anytime I brought up something I was interested in. They would simply listen, nod, then return the conversation to their own interests. So I gave up trying after a time. But here's what hurts the most. They made no attempt to contact me as I began to distance myself from them. They seemed to be quite content with me removing myself from their lives, almost as if they were glad to see me go. To be honest, that hurt. Family members should be aware when one of their own is gradually fading away, but they didn't appear to give a damn. It simply validated my long-held belief that I didn't belong with them. I eventually only went to see them for important occasions like birthdays and holidays. Even so though, I still felt more like a visitor to their lives. I would arrive, take care of the family business, and then depart. The dialogue was always courteous but superficial. There was no genuine connection, no warmth. Additionally, Emily and I never shared the strong sisterhood that many siblings do. She has always been the family's golden kid, the one who did everything right, went down the route my parents desired, and blended in flawlessly. I was the black sheep, the odd one out. They aren't awful individuals or anything, but the way they discreetly disparage me shows that they may be true bullies. You know how some small remarks can have a profound impact despite appearing innocuous at first glance? Yes, I would get that. I eventually came to the conclusion that it was simply preferable to avoid them as much as possible. Why place yourself in an uncomfortable and out-of-place situation? The problem is that when Jonathan joined us for Christmas dinner last year, I didn't feel totally invisible for the first time in a long time. My family has a way of making me feel as like I'm an outsider in my own house and that I don't belong. I wasn't treated that way by Jonathan though. Instead of treating me like the odd black sheep I often feel around my family, he was actually kind to me and spoke to me like a regular person. I didn't give it much thought at first. It was only basic politeness after all. However, Emily was very troubled by this for some reason. It's not as though Jonathan and I were engaging in a meaningful, private discussion. We simply discussed a variety of topics, including travel, school, amusing incidents at work, and other everyday topics. However, Emily seemed strange about it right away. I tried to ignore the cold stares she kept giving me during supper. That is, until she addressed me directly later that night. I will always remember that. She said, "I know what you're doing," and drew me aside. "You're attempting to take my boyfriend, even though you've always been envious of me." To be honest, I was stunned. Steal her man? I mean? Even so, where did that originate? She refused to let it go even after I told her she was being foolish and laughed it off. She insisted that I was being too nice with Jonathan and that he was acting strangely around me. It was such a crazy charge that I wasn't even sure how to react. Where the hell was this coming from? Being the center of attention has always been Emily's thing. My folks adore her, she's the ideal person. She's their golden child, so I understand. But saying that I attempted to snatch her fiancé. Even for her it was a new low. Like I normally do with her drama, I tried to ignore it. I assumed she was simply being insecure or worried for whatever reason because we're not close anyhow. The problem is that after that night, things became strange amongst us all. I didn't believe Emily could have gotten any farther away. She seemed to be deliberately avoiding me now, even though we were never close in the first place. She would either act as though she couldn't be bothered or give me one-word responses if I tried to speak with her. She would be glued to Jonathan's side during family get-togethers, as if she were claiming her space. It was absurd. Jonathan, however, pretended that nothing had changed. He remained courteous, amiable, and normal in my presence. What truly irritates me, I suppose, is how easily my family seems to agree with Emily. There were subtle clues, but no one ever spoke to me explicitly. Every time Emily and Jonathan were present, my mother would give me these strange stares. My dad, who is generally quite indifferent, began saying more about the value of connections and the necessity of family support. Everything was quite passive-aggressive. My anger increased as I gave it more thought. I've never been the kind to become entangled in the drama of others, much less that of my sister. Why would I suddenly get interested in Emily's fiancé when we almost ever speak outside of family gatherings? It was illogical. My grandparents informed me of Emily's engagement a few months later. Indeed, I was not even informed that my own sister was getting married. Finding out from my grandparents was a stomach punch, even if I wasn't exactly expecting her to send me a personalized invitation with love and glitter or anything at this point. You know, the kind that validates your preconceived notions about your family's lack of concern for you. I suppose I had been clinging to a sliver of hope that, despite the stress and distance, she would still think of me as having been a part of this significant occasion in her life. Hey, we're sisters, right? I thought. We may not be close, but I am still her family. That was obviously too much to ask for, though. When I learned about the engagement, I kept quiet to Emily. I initially assumed that she might have forgotten to tell me or that she was simply preoccupied with wedding preparations. For some reason, I was still giving her the benefit of the doubt. Even though I realized that sounds foolish. I assumed that she would ultimately give me a call or at the very least, send me a last-minute invitation. However, days stretched into weeks, and nothing happened. Crickets. Then I got an unexpected call from Emily. Since we hadn't actually spoken since that strange accusation over Christmas, I must admit that I was taken aback when her name appeared on my phone. I replied, attempting to sound informal, as if my own sister hadn't forgotten me entirely. She broke the news to him after a few awkward minutes of small talk. "I'm not inviting you to the wedding." As I tried to take in what she had just said, I became silent for a moment. Even though I wasn't particularly eager to leave or anything, it still hurt to hear her say it aloud. When I asked her why, she gave me the most ridiculous explanation. "I don't want you there because Jonathan has feelings for you. It will simply be uncomfortable." I had to laugh, laughed aloud indeed. It was unbelievable to me that this was taking place. To begin with, Jonathan has no affection for me, and even if he did, I wouldn't have stood up during the ceremony to declare my unwavering love for him. I didn't even want to argue because it was all so absurd. I simply hung up after saying, "Have a great wedding and happy marriage." It didn't really matter to me whether or not I was a part of her special day because I didn't need that turmoil in my life and, to be honest, we weren't close. Emily and I were living in two entirely separate universes, and I had long since accepted this. However, I simply needed to let things out and perhaps gain some external insight. Am I the only one who thinks this whole thing is crazy? Have any of you had a similar situation? I would appreciate any guidance. Update 1. I need to write this all down while it's still fresh in my head since yesterday was completely crazy. Emily's rehearsal dinner descended into total mayhem, and I was somehow pulled into the center of it all. My phone started exploding when I was spending a typical Thursday night cuddled up with my laptop, working on an assignment. I chose to ignore it at first. Lately, I've gotten fairly adept at that. However, in less than 10 minutes, I saw that I had 7 missed calls from my dad. My dad doesn't call more than once now. He's the kind that assumes you're busy if you don't respond right away and will try again later. 7 calls then? There was clearly a problem. He was trembling when I finally answered. He sounded like someone I had never heard before. "Michelle, you must visit the location immediately." Like a broken record, he said, "Right now." He just replied, "It's about Jonathan and Emily," when I inquired what was wrong. "Just come, please." His voice was so desperate that I was a little alarmed. But here's the thing, did they really think that I would just drop everything and rush to their aid after all of the turmoil, allegations, and exclusion from the wedding? I told him just that. "Remember, Dad, I'm not attending this wedding." Emily was rather explicit about that. "Michelle, please," he replied. "Jonathan is unwilling to hold the wedding without your presence." I was halted in my tracks by that. What? My phone beeped with another call, this time from Mom, before I could comprehend that bomb. She was crying, really crying when I turned over. She kept saying, "Your sister needs you." As if she had forgotten how they had all treated me during the previous few months. Listening to her cry about sisterly love and family loyalty when they had been okay without me until things went wrong was weird. Emily then called in a shambled, hardly comprehensible voice. Jonathan apparently showed up for the rehearsal dinner and asked me right away where I was. He lost it when Emily informed him I wasn't invited, but it was more subdued and disappointed than furious. He declared that he could not marry someone who would treat their own sister in such a manner in front of their friends, the wedding party, and both families. Recounting it, Emily sobbed into the phone. He claimed that after observing their treatment of me, he couldn't be a member of a family that would reject someone in such a way. "I was just like Mom and Dad," he stated, adding that he didn't want to be around such poisonous behavior. If I'm being honest, a significant portion of me felt validated. At last, someone had witnessed what I had endured for years. In fact, someone had spoken up and declared that it was unacceptable. Emily wasn't finished though. In between sobbing, she began outlining this intricate plan for me to visit the location and explain that there was only a major misunderstanding and that I was the one who decided not to attend the wedding, claiming that it was entirely my idea. She persisted in repeating, "We can fix this. Simply come and inform Jonathan that you have no intention of attending the wedding. Inform him that you were never left out. Michelle, please. I can't let him go." It was all breathtakingly audacious. It's absurd that after months of me behaving like a man-stealing villain and being told outright that I wasn't allowed to her wedding because her fiancé could be attracted to me. She wanted me to lie in order to keep her connection intact after making me feel like trash in my own family. I let her cry on the other end of the line for a long time without saying anything. Then, as coolly as I could, I said, "I won't lie to you, Emily. You are now dealing with the repercussions of your decisions to ignore me and treat me as though I didn't exist. Fixing it is not my responsibility." "But he'll hear you out." She almost let out a scream. "He believes in you." I answered, "Perhaps he trusts me because I've never given him a reason not to. Perhaps he has doubts about your true identity because of anything he perceives in the way you have treated me. In any case, I won't be attending the event and I won't tell lies to improve your reputation." She was still complaining when I hung up. I then made myself a cup of tea, switched off my phone entirely, and took a seat to truly think about what had just transpired. My phone continued to light up with notifications over the course of the following several hours. I examined it and found voicemails from my parents, missed calls from Emily's pals, and texts from relatives I hadn't spoken to in years. The entire family seemed to have banded together to try to coerce me into cleaning up Emily's mess. But what do you know? For the first time in my life, I was very sure that avoiding them was the proper thing to do. Jonathan alone had been able to see through their actions. Not because of anything I said or did, but because of how they treated me, he had come to that conclusion. And to be honest, that seemed like the fullest confirmation I could have hoped for. Last night, I went to bed without using my phone, and I slept better than I have in months. For once, let them handle the consequences of their own behavior. I'm done cleaning up other people's crap and being the family scapegoat. My grandparents, who are the only relatives I still communicate with, informed me this morning that Jonathan is not returning calls from Emily or my parents. It seems that he has informed his family that the wedding is final. My parents are working feverishly to contain the damage, Emily is inconsolable, and I'm just sitting here, at last content with my choice to keep my distance. I realize this is lengthy, but I had to say it all. I appreciate all of the comments on my previous post that affirmed my choice to keep my distance from my family. You were okay. Sometimes it's best to take a back seat and let others deal with the fallout from their own behavior. Update 2. Many of you inquired about my early years and the reasons behind my prolonged estrangement from my family. Since it's a somewhat weighty story, I didn't delve into it in my first post, but in light of recent events, I believe this is a good moment to explore some of it. The problem is that I suffer from social anxiety. I always had the feeling that something was wrong with me as a child, but I was never able to articulate it. However, my parents were traditionalists who thought mental health conditions were merely pretexts. They would frequently say things like, "You need to toughen up," or "You're just being dramatic." They would label me weak or lazy if I ever showed signs of anxiety or a panic attack, as if I was choosing to feel that way. When I look back, I can see a lot of warning signs. I had this big presentation for English class when I was 15. The thought of standing in front of 30 students was a recipe for a social anxiety disorder. I had trouble sleeping the night before, and I felt physically ill the morning of. I begged to stay at home and informed my parents. My father's reaction? "Your nervousness won't cause life to stop. Quit making a huge deal out of everything." I ultimately experienced a severe panic attack in front of the class. My voice began breaking. Some children even started chuckling, and my hands were shaking so much that I was unable to grip my notes. The room seemed to be whirling, but I was unable to go out. Rather than offering consolation, my mother simply remarked, "See, you made it through. All that drama was in vain." Everything was made worse by Emily, who was the ideal sister. She was the student body president, the debate team captain, and pretty much everything else that I couldn't be due to my anxiety. When she had large gatherings of her friends, people would remark that I was the weird sister who never came out of her room. I heard Emily say to her pals once, "Yeah, she's just antisocial. She believes that she is too good to be with anyone." My life changed when I was in college. My first semester was a total meltdown for me. Being away from home, adjusting to new social circumstances, and attempting to balance my anxiety while attending classes became too much to handle. I recall feeling like I was dying while I sat in my dorm room, gasping for air. I was almost dragged to the college counseling center by my roommate, who, bless her, saw something was really wrong. The first person who truly listened to me was Dr. Martinez, whom I met there. She didn't urge me to toughen up or minimize my emotions. Rather, she assisted me in comprehending my condition. Dr. Martinez suggested seeing a psychiatrist for a proper diagnosis after a few sessions. It was like finally giving the monster I'd been battling my entire life a name when I received that diagnosis of social anxiety disorder. It wasn't seeking attention or being dramatic, as my family had always insisted. It was a legitimate ailment, and more significantly, it was treatable. The sessions of treatment opened my eyes. I learned from Dr. Martinez that my family's actions were not only unsupportive but also purposefully damaging. She gave me advice on setting limits, advocating for myself, and identifying harmful behaviors. At that point, I began to intentionally distance myself from my family. What really bothers me, though, is that my parents totally rejected my diagnosis when I tried to explain it to them. "These doctors are just trying to make money by labeling everything a disease," my mother genuinely said. "I was merely using big words to justify my antisocial behavior," Emily added, rolling her eyes. I made one final attempt to explain things to them last Thanksgiving, before all of this wedding turmoil began. I had prepared an entire speech on social anxiety, complete with research and figures. "Michelle, when are you going to stop making excuses and start living in the real world?" My dad interrupted me mid-sentence. I came to the realization that they would never change at that point. They would never make an effort to comprehend. They had an unchangeable perception of me as the challenging kid, the dramatic one, the problem. And what do you know? It was strangely liberating to realize that. It made it easier for me to cease looking for their understanding or acceptance. In retrospect, I can see how this tendency directly contributed to the wedding scenario, my parents' hasty acceptance of Emily's story without even challenging it, and Emily's rapid leap to believe I was stealing her fiancé. It's all a part of their long-held belief that I'm the one who causes difficulty and should be managed. Jonathan saw right through this. He observed how they handled me, how they minimized my emotions, and how they used me as the blame for everything. And he called it out for what it was. Poisonous conduct, in contrast to everyone else in my family's social circle who simply accepted their own version of reality. I suppose I'm attempting to convey that this wedding drama wasn't an isolated incident. The result of years of family dynamics in which I was consistently portrayed as the bad guy, the problem child, and the one who needed to be fixed. Perhaps that's why Jonathan's choice feels so righteous to me. Someone else finally noticed what I've been going through for years. Yes, that is the backstory that many of you requested. It clarifies why I'm not in a rush to make repairs right now. I've spent far too many years attempting to change how my family views me, to get their understanding, and to gain their acceptance. I finished that. Accepting that certain individuals, even members of your family, will never understand or accept you is sometimes the healthiest thing you can do. Update 3. A month has passed since everything went wrong, and I must now reveal the last portion of this tale. At least now I can say that what began as a wedding drama is really finished, even though it has grown into something I never could have predicted. Emily lost everything when her wedding was called off. My new phone number was somehow obtained by her, and she shared it with everyone she knew. I was suddenly inundated with hundreds of hateful comments from strangers, her acquaintances, and distant family members. Guilt-tripping and downright intimidation were among the threats. The vandalism followed. Classic Emily, who used to do this to girls she detested in high school, was the first to leave eggs in my car. She escalated when that failed to get the desired response. I can't even remember how many times I discovered my mailbox ruined, my car vandalized, or my apartment door covered in offensive notes. She cut all 4 of my car tires and left a threatening note in her distinctive handwriting, which was the last straw. My parents consciously chose to ignore Emily's actions during all of this. "Girls will be girls," or "you need to be more understanding of your sister's pain," was their standard response to every event. They dismissed it as Emily just wanting to talk, even after I showed them security camera footage of her attempting to break into my flat. However, I was ready because of this incredible Reddit community, especially those who suggested that I install security cameras and record everything. I learned from the attorney you suggested that this constituted criminal harassment and vandalism rather than just family drama. Using witness accounts, video evidence, photos, and hundreds of threatening messages, we created a solid case. Emily ultimately realized she had gone too far when my lawyer provided our evidence along with the cease and desist notice. Her attempted break-in was captured on security tape, which was especially damaging. She attempted to bargain through her own attorney, stating that if I dropped everything, she would cover the damages. However, I declined. This was about accountability and penalties, not money. The court case proceeded quickly and decisively. Emily was accused of attempting to break and enter, criminal harassment and vandalism. She was given a permanent restraining order, required therapy, and a 1-year suspended sentence. Given the deliberate nature of her conduct and the substantial evidence of her increasing behavior, the judge was especially severe. My parents' response to the decision was expected. For destroying your sister's life over a few pranks, they accused me of being callous. In fact, they advised me to just move away if I felt unsafe, after I told them that Emily had repeatedly harassed me, damaged my belongings, and attempted to break into my house. I never intended to speak with them again after that. An out-of-court settlement was reached in the civil litigation. In addition to the damages for emotional distress and lost wages, Emily had to pay for all the harm she had caused. Her campaign of harassment on social media has cost me a number of freelancing businesses. More significantly, the settlement included a non-contact clause that prohibits our parents from serving as middlemen or flying monkeys any longer. According to my lawyer, Emily and my parents' concerns about their reputations played a role in the speedy settlement. It turns out that their concern for the opinions of their country club pals is far greater than their concern for doing the right thing. Normal. Since then, I've relocated to a new apartment in a building that is secure and under constant observation. My social media accounts have been closed down. My contact information has been totally updated, and my clients have been incredibly understanding of the situation. Someone who heard about my situation and was impressed by my handling of it even extended an offer of employment to me. The most unexpected result of it all? For the first time in my life, I feel liberated. The expectations and criticisms of my family are not weighing on me. I am no longer the scapegoat. I'm just Michelle, creating my own life according to my own rules. I'm neither the dramatic nor the challenging child. My life was actually altered by the Reddit community, who helped me through everything. In court, your recommendations on documentation and security precautions were crucial. When I started to doubt myself, your encouraging remarks kept me going, and your accounts of similar situations made me understand I wasn't alone. Remember that sharing DNA does not give someone the right to mistreat you if you're dealing with toxic family members. Walking away and letting them deal with the fallout from their actions is sometimes the healthiest course of action. It's about establishing limits and demanding respect, not about getting even. With therapy, my social anxiety is improving, but it's still there. It turns out that a lot of it was related to the continuous criticism and gaslighting I experienced as a child. Who would have thought that removing poisonous individuals might be such a successful treatment? I will no longer be updated now that this phase of my life is genuinely over. I'm concentrating on my education, profession, and creating a new network of chosen family members for support. I want to express my gratitude to everyone who supported me and followed my tale. You gave me the confidence to leave and the strength to advocate for myself. Living well is said to be the best kind of retaliation. The best closure, I would add, is knowing that you have finally advocated for yourself. I'm tired of being used as a scapegoat or victim by others. I've taken control of my life and will never look back. Reddit, thank you for everything and goodbye.